Yeah.
I have a general walk.
You're waiting for her,
go
yeah.
to the deli. And...
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Halton Local Plan Hearing Session this morning. I'm Lynn Donnelly, the Programme Officer. The inspectors will join shortly before 9:30. Could you please mute your microphone and turn off your camera whilst others join the meeting? I will get back to you shortly before the inspectors join. Thank you. Hello everyone. Could every participants please turn their camera on and keep their mics muted? The inspectors will join shortly. Thank you. The inspectors have joined the meeting and will take over shortly. Thank you.
Good morning everybody and welcome. It's 9:30 AM and it's time for me to open this hearing session on matter 12B and 16 relating to the strategic residential allocations and Greenbelt safeguarded land in Hale. My name is David Troy. I've been appointed jointly with Caroline Malloy to hold the examination to the soundness of the Halton delivery and allocations local plan and to produce a report of our conclusions and recommendations with regard to the soundness. Before we begin, can everyone hear and see me? Thank you. As the majority of you have already attended previous hearing sessions on the plan, I don't intend to go through the formal introduction, but we'll cover a few housekeeping issues. Can everyone ensure their mobile phones are switched off or on silent whilst the hearing's in session? During the hearing sessions, if you keep your camera switched on for the entire session, if possible, with your microphones muted until you're invited to speak. We should invite people to speak at a particular time. If you have something to contribute at an appropriate part of the discussion, please indicate you wish to by using the raised hand function in Teams. Does anybody have any procedural questions at this stage? Okay, can I just, for the morning session, could I just ask basically the council just to introduce himself and then I'll move on to the other participants.
Yes, good morning, sir. My name's Alistair Troy. I'm a principal planner in the local plans team.
Good morning. My name's John Hunter. I'm the barrister and instructed to represent the council. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Catherine Brindley and I'm a principal planner within the planning policy team at Halton Council. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Anne Moyers, policy officer, Halton Council.
Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. Sorry about that. Good morning, sir. I'm Jonathan Farmer, Service Manager, Highway Development at the Council, representing Highway Authority and Lead Local Flood Authority.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. I'm Phil Peake. I'm here to support John Farmer from a highway development perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, sir. I'm Julia Parr. I'm here to support John Farmer as the Lead Local Flood Authority.
Okay.
Morning, sir. Andrew Plant, the Divisional Manager for Planning and Development. Also, sir, today we've got Mark Hopwood on the call, who is a consultant that supports the council in relation to risk and so relates to the health and safety executive consultation zones, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we just go through the other participants, starting with Edward Lander, please.
Good morning, sir. My name is Edward Landor. I'm representing Hale Parish Council from Landor Planning Consultants Limited. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Ian Gilbert from Barton Wilmore, representing Redborough Homes.
Is Mr. Travascus joined us? He's not here yet, Lynn. No, okay, thank you. Mr. Valerie from please.
Good morning, sir. Conor Valley from Avison Young, representing Harworth Group.
And Mr. Easton, please.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Jonathan Easton, a barrister instructed by Avison Young on behalf of Harworth Group.
Okay, thanks very much. Is that everybody apart from Mr. Valerie, I understand? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so if I could just begin, obviously we're just going to start with the looking initially this morning at the strategic residential allocation SRL9, that's W24 and W45, basically there's two sites there, and then we'll move on to the safeguarded land once we've been through that as the agenda SG11, SG13. So we'll move on to those. So if we could just at the outset just ask the council just to give some background. If initially on site W24, which is the land west of Hellgate Road, how they arrived at this particular site allocation, how it was identified and what options were considered, and then we could just move on to the other small parcels of land at W45 of Halebank Road.
Thank you, sir. Just a minor procedural issue which you may like may assist. As you may or may, or assume you may be aware, the council has been in discussion with the Harworth Group concerning their representations, and particularly in terms of a potential statement of common ground and potential proposed modifications that would affect the land that is currently within W24 and land is currently shown as within SG13. So I don't know if you would find it would aid today's discussion if we could rejig the running order to deal with SG13 following W24 and deal with SG11 later. Looking at the participants list, it appears that everybody is down to is basically booked in for all sessions, so hopefully that shouldn't cause any participants any particular issues.
So just to be clear, sorry, you're looking at SG13. That's the land south of Hellbank Road, and then moving on to the allocation sites. Is that correct? Is that what you're talking about? And then SG11.
It's effectively, yes. Effectively, the discussion will probably be combining W24 and SG13. Obviously, you have the representations from the Harworth Group, who are basically suggesting a different disposition of land uses affecting both sites. I say the council has been working with the Harworth Group to agree a statement of common ground. As I say, we do apologise to them because I think they're getting quite frustrated with us, unfortunately, with having an all-out election last week. We have a new leader. We don't know who our portfolio holder is. So actually being able to get a political steer on the issues surrounding this site has been somewhat difficult. Hopefully now, I say we do now know who the leader is, who incidentally represents this ward, and I believe tomorrow we will find out who our new portfolio holder is, so we will be able to start the discussions with the elected members as to the potential changes or suggested modifications affecting this site. But as I say, it might just aid the discussion if we deal with the sites either together or back to back, rather than dealing with SG11 in the middle.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Just Mrs. Moore, just have you got any sort of, if you deal with the two issues as in unison?
Yes, I would be happy with that approach of bringing SG13 forward in the agenda. I think there is still merit in dealing with the two allocations, sort of the allocation and the safeguarded side separately. But obviously the discussion around the amendments will flow between the two sessions, I imagine.
Yep. Okay, I'm happy with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Gilbert, I think have you got a raised hand?
Yes, please. Can I just ask, is there a draft of that statement of common ground available, or anything available on the examination website, sir?
I'll put that question to just at this. I mean, obviously we'll probably come on to it, but yeah, Mr. Cross and then Mr. Eason, please.
No, the statement hasn't been submitted to the examination as yet. As I say, it's been the council's been in an awkward position in terms of say, being able to get political steer. The proposals effectively are informed, and we won't go through the detail, they are informed by the suggested amendments put forward in the Harworth Group statement to 12B, and we will probably be referring to the maps in that statement quite extensively during the session. But to say the statement is quite broad brush. It just basically sets out some broad principles, notwithstanding that the Harworth Group obviously believe are still obviously standing by their original submission and seeking the wider allocation. I think they view this very much as a fallback position, as being not as good as they're seeking from the examination, but a better disposition of uses than shown on the proposed submission draft.
Okay, Mr. Eason.
So that's broadly accurate. There is not an agreed statement of common ground before the examination. We did send a draft quite some time ago, but didn't think it would be appropriate to send a draft to the examination unless and until the council had agreed it. Broadly, there are three options. There's W24 and SG13 remain as in the draft plan. That there are amended boundaries for W24 and SG13, which is the middle ground, as it were, about which we were seeking to achieve common ground with the council. And there's my client's preferred position, which is a larger allocation, which we've explained and identified in our hearing statement. It would be very useful, I'm sure Mr. Cross will do this as we go through, just to explain the council's position on each of those three items, because at the moment we don't know, I'm afraid, what the council's position is. Well, whilst I've got the floor, can I also mention this, and it's one of the matters to be considered in the agenda. We have also prepared a draft development criteria policy for the allocation. I know that's an issue that's been discussed at previous sessions. Again, that was submitted to the council a number of weeks ago. We did attempt to submit it to the examination, but for understandable reasons it was sent back, given the time limits. But that is a matter which we have sought to try and gain some common ground from the council on. It's certainly something that I would wish to raise during the course of today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that can be raised obviously verbally at the appropriate time. Thank you very much. So,
sorry, Mr. Troy, just to from a procedural point of view, the second option that's being proposed in the draft statement of common ground, that wasn't in the original submissions, I'm assuming. Mr.
Correct. So, yeah,
correct.
So there were two options in the original submissions. There was the allocations as in the draft plan. The other option, which we've already identified in our hearing statement, is the larger allocation from our point of view. So the second option is not something that's currently before the examination now.
And when did the second option emerge as a potential option?
I can get the precise dates when it's been discussed between us and the council for a couple of months, and I think we attempted to resolve that into a statement of common ground with specific plans attached to that statement of common ground and an explanation in the text as to how we reached that position, I think 2 months ago.
Okay, I mean, obviously it's quite a significant change to bring in at this late stage, and it wasn't in the original representation, so we'll have to bear that in mind as we go through the discussion. Okay, thank you. Mr. Troy.
Right, yes. If we just go as I outlined initially with the, as I say, if we rejig it sort of to bring SG13 forward, but in the agenda, that's absolutely fine. If we could just start then with the allocation, please. That basically the background to W24 and then W45. If Mr. Cross could give us the background on that and what other options. Obviously, you've already spoke about some of the options just then. If you could just talk about that, please.
Thank you, sir. Again, I say the same story that we've been telling for the last two sessions. Effectively, the core strategy examination concluded there was exceptional circumstances to warrant or to require a greenbelt review for land around Widnes and Hale in order to find sufficient development land to meet the development needs of the community north of the river. The core strategy we had the policy figure 552. Whenever the council set about doing the delivery and allocations local plan, it was looking at a policy figure of 466 per annum. In the early work, the council concluded that a greenbelt review was necessary not only in Widnes but also in Runcorn, and undertook said review in order to find sufficient land to meet the development needs of the communities both sides of the river. Following the publication draft of the plan, which identified significant areas of land in the Halebank area for potential housing or safeguarded land, the government introduced a new standard method for the housing requirement. The council revisited the housing requirement figure and has concluded that a figure of 350 is appropriate, and has then revisited the proposed allocations or the proposed greenbelt releases from the publication draft, and has been able to put some of the previously identified land to reconfirm that as to be retained as greenbelt. Some of the previously proposed sites for housing allocation have been reallocated as safeguarded land, and the sites in Halebank that were particularly affected are SG11 and SG13 were both previously identified as housing allocations, and they've both now been identified as being more appropriate as safeguarded land. In reaching that conclusion, the council's had regard to the total quantum of land required, development land required over the planned period and a period beyond, and has sought to identify the minimum amount of greenbelt land, greenbelt release in order to meet that requirement.
Okay, thank you. Right, it's obviously when we bring in these amended schemes, obviously it's obviously just to, obviously you've given some background already, obviously to give us some indication of where you are with those at this stage. Maybe as we go through, we can obviously just bring those into the actual discussion. Obviously the one we're obviously aware of is the one that was in the submission, which is obviously the what was regarded as the latest preferred option in terms of the changes. But we'll obviously our plan is our role is to basically assess the actual plan as submitted. So that's have a look at that. So in terms of just is any of the participants want to come in at that stage on the background, how these sites were looked at, and any issues relating to the options considered at this stage? Mr. Lander?
Just a point of clarification early on, if I may. I'm looking at the council's, excuse me, sorry, looking at the council's paper for this session, which is matter 12B03, and it's pages 389, I think. So, sorry, bear with me, to about 413, which are relevant for this session.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at page 409. Are we all agreed that this site W24 is in the green belt currently, and it's proposed for release? Excuse me. Because I'm looking at part of there's a part of the site is referred to as 2.75 hectares, refers to it as a school site. And I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Mr. Cross, I don't know if you can pull up that. It's obviously the I think it's headed it's one of the site assessments on page 409 of the, and I think basically just within the description it talks about school buildings and playing fields. Can you just clarify that for us as well? Actually, I think it's probably just because as far as I'm aware, obviously there's no crucial field from looking at basically and is within Greenbelt from what I can see from the information submitted. But if you just clarify that.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, that must just be an error. I say obviously these pro formas were generated from a database. A lot of the database was populated by a GIS system, but elements of it were manually input. So I'm assuming that is just an error in the inputting. I say yes, there doesn't appear to be buildings on that particular parcel, and we're not aware that there was educational use on that site. So I think that is just a clear error.
It's within Greenbelt as well, I think, from what I can gather as well. Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
The Greenbelt boundary goes down the road.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Mr. Landers, is that, yeah?
Well, I suppose the follow-up question is, to what extent is that misleading? Because the information is on the examination documents. That's it's a rhetorical question. I haven't got an answer for you, sir, I'm afraid. But I wish to follow it up with that question. Thank you.
Ms. Cross, so I think I'm fairly clear basically what the land's used for from looking at the actual site and obviously the information surrounding it. But I appreciate it appears to be just an error, and presumably just in the site pro form. Is that right, Mr. Cross? Just from what I can.
It would appear to be so, sir. And I say obviously there was certainly no intent to mislead, and obviously each of the pro formas does include a map and an aerial photograph.
Okay.
So I think it is quite clear that it's just a mistake.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Valerie.
Thank you, sir. It's just to make the point, obviously, this isn't the only input on the evidence base. So I think if you look at the SI sustainability appraisal, it recognises the status of the site.
Yes, so we'll move on to those. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. If I could just go on to just the planning history status. Actually, could you just cover just in the background, Oscar, in the background, just the plots of land at W45 as well, Mr. Cross. Just there's the small parcels of land owned stand along Hale Road that have been effectively that appear to be within this particular strategic allocation, even though they're across the road.
Yes, thank you, sir. Those, I believe, are small plots of land that are actually in the ownership of the council. We have been liaising with our property services team to see what the current status and the proposals are for those areas. And we believe that a couple of the plots are being brought to market shortly. One of the plots we believe is currently in use a lease, but whenever the lease expires, the residential property at the front and I believe the land at the back will be split and the site will be brought forward for development. The sites are not currently in the green belt and they were basically seen as just infill residential development plots.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks. Right, so just go on to just the planning history status of the site W24 at land west of Halegate Road, and then just if you just give me, I think you give me a brief update there on W45 as well, but if you just give me the planning history status.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure that the search will identify sort of just small scale residential applications associated with the properties abutting or on the edge of the site. We're not aware of any substantive applications affecting the entirety of the site.
Okay, thank you. Is that from the developer's perspective, Ms. Bowder, is that correct in terms of W24 in terms of planning status? Yeah,
yes,
okay. Okay. I would just confirm on W45 then, just the planning status of those plots as well, please, Mr. Cross.
Again, the council hasn't, the council is the owner, we haven't brought forward applications for the redevelopment of those plots at present.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, I'm just going to then move on to just the Greenbelt review in relation to the allocated sites, if I could. If the council just could basically in relation to site W25, 24, basically just basically outline the findings of the Greenbelt review specifically in relation to the land and what contribution it makes to the purposes of the Greenbelt in its current form. If we start with the first purpose to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up area,
Thank you, sir. I think it's easiest to have reference to document EL09 group sites, and site W24 is effectively covered by group site S. And the study
S, isn't it?
S for sugar.
Thank you.
And the study concluded that it had a moderate impact on purposes of including lands within the Greenbelt. In terms of the check unrestricted sprawl, the site is basically is reasonably well contained, or is partially contained, I apologise, having urban form on the northern and western boundaries. So it is contiguous to the urban area. So it's basically moderate impact on that. In terms of merging, it's in possibly one of the slightly wider gaps, certainly between settlements within Halton. So it's not considered that the development of this parcel would lead to the risk of towns merging. And in terms of safeguarding from encroachment, we believe that strong boundaries could be created as part of a development to ensure that if this site was released from the Greenbelt, that a strong boundary to protect from further encroachment could be created.
Okay, just on the so basically in terms of the second purpose, obviously about the merging, it wouldn't lead to a merging of the towns as such. In this instance, it would just be a narrowing of the gap between Hale and basically the side of Halebank and Hale, and also the edge of Liverpool. Is that correct? Rather than a merging.
Yeah.
You touched on just the in terms of when you talked about the boundaries and the purposes there. If I could just literally just pick up, actually, just before I go on to the boundaries, just pick up on one of the parcels. I appreciate you picked up on the group assessment, group S space in relation to one of the individual parcels. There was basically identified as making a significant contribution to the purposes of safeguarding the countryside from encroachment and maintaining the gap between the settlements of Widnes and Hale, and also Widnes and Liverpool. It's plot GB171. It's in the very far southeast corner, more or less immediately adjacent to Hellgate Road and Pickering Farm. You sit in the very bottom right-hand corner of the actual site. It's GB171. I just really, obviously, just because obviously it's flagged as a significant contribution in that particular parcel. I know there's in the individual parcels there is a range of sort of contributions, but I appreciate on that one it has picked up. Is that justified to include that land? And can the boundaries be changed? It's just obviously I wanted just to look at that particular one just briefly. It's a fairly small parcel of land in the southeast corner, immediately adjacent to Hellgate Road.
Okay, sorry, what was the Greenbelt reference again? Sorry,
GB171.
Thank you. Helps if you pick up the right document, doesn't it? EMO 6 is the first one. Again, I think that's, again, it's looking like it's partially scoring well because it's Unlike some of the other parcels which are abutting the existing built area, this is assessed as being separate from the built area. It's not contiguous. Obviously, if the surrounding land were to be considered for release from the greenbelt, that part of the assessment would change. It would have contiguous boundaries with the urban area, and therefore that scoring would be reduced, and therefore its impact on the purposes of including the site within the greenbelt would be substantially reduced.
Okay, and do you think that land is justified on that basis then, including that land within the site itself?
Yes, sir. I think the wider site has to be treated as a site. Should be treated as a whole.
And you touched on in terms of the boundaries. Obviously, this particular boundary. I don't know how the developers envisage basically the impact of development on this part of the site will be dealt with. Mr. Valerie, just obviously in terms of this particular, we'll move on to the boundaries and the particular strength of them in a minute.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we'll deal with the boundary point here, but I think you can probably see from our appendix 1, I believe, to our matter 12 statement, the master plan. So it's a green infrastructure heavy master plan, and where green edges and strong defensible boundaries need to be created, the master plan takes account of that, such as here. And I think, as was touched upon yesterday, sir, on some of the other sites, clearly we would work with the council to make sure that there's an appropriate treatment in this location, a lowering of density, and certainly a strong green buffer in this location. So that would be our position on that, sir. Okay,
and just picking up on that, looking at the strength of the boundaries on the effectively on the southern and western boundaries of site W24. In the majority of cases, I think they're obviously either weak or medium. Obviously the ones further to the south generally are weak, basically, and obviously those where I think there's obviously a public footpath through the site. There's obviously a yellow moderate boundary where those hedgerows are actually created. I wonder again if just to reiterate how we just strengthen those particular boundaries. How would they be incorporated to define obviously a strong boundary to the green belt? So if you just Mr. Valerie.
Yes, sir. I think you may have picked up from the appendix 2 to our matter 12 statements. We've had a landscape and greenbelt note done by Tidy Grange consultants who've informed the master plan approach. So essentially, existing habitats of value would be retained where necessary, with key green corridors through the site, and those would filter out to edges to the site effectively, which where they're weak currently would be planted with strategic green infrastructure. And there's probably a separate point, sir, in relation to the link road, which we might come on to, which in itself would provide a hard edge, although I appreciate we might come on to that later.
Okay, so basically just in relation to the allocations as they are, basically you'd be looking for green infrastructure, strong additional landscaping along those boundaries. Is that how you envisage it?
That's correct, and we see those boundaries as potentially providing opportunities for new rights of way, new footpaths, redirected rights of way where necessary, just to reinforce those.
Okay. Could you just say do the council agree with that in terms of obviously do they agree with how the southern and western boundaries could be strengthened, the options that have been put forward?
Broadly, sir, yes. I say, as you know, the existing boundaries are predominantly weak in this location. Development would be expected to create strong defensible boundaries.
Okay. And just in terms of overall the balance of the different green belt purposes you've mentioned, obviously, when you considered the actual greenbelt purposes, did you think was there any sort of more important than others in your assessment? From the council perspective, was there any scoring applied in making that final decision on site W24? So I can just get an overall idea of how you balance those different purposes.
I think this was sort of touched upon yesterday. The guidance is quite clear that none of the purposes should carry more weight than another, although in practical terms, obviously, particularly where there's a particularly narrow gap, then the gap and the danger of merging of settlements either physically or perceptually would carry potentially greater weight. That's not the position in regards to this site. So all the purposes were assessed equally, sir.
Okay, and just I think you've already touched on it. Obviously, in overall terms, the Greenbelt identifies site as having a moderate contribution to the purposes, including land. That's correct.
Correct, sir.
Yeah. Could I just ask the developer's perspective on this particular point, just in terms of whether they agree with this particular the overall contribution and obviously the contribution to the different purposes, whether they think it's a moderate.
Yeah, so we've said in writing that we agree with the conclusions the council have reached. It could direct you, sir, to there's a plan within Appendix 2 of our Matter 12 statement. It's called Greenbelt Analysis, undertaken by Tyler Grange. So it gives you a helpful diagrammatic overview of the gap between the allocation, the land which Harworth Group control, Village of Hale, and the Liverpool urban area. So if you're looking for a ready reference plan, which might just assist you with that.
Okay, thank you. And if the land was developed, what would the effect of the proposed allocation be on the purposes of the Greenbelt? If we could just ask that just to the council, what would they consider the effect in this particular instance?
I say I don't think it would have a detrimental effect on the remaining Greenbelt land, sir.
Okay. And just in terms of just compensatory improvements proposed to offset the impact of removing land from the Greenbelt, could basically maybe the developers can just help in this particular, what compensatory improvements to the environmental quality, accessibility of remaining land would be delivered?
No problem. So I think again the Tyler Grange plan I just referred to might help with your previous question in that it gives an overview of the existing features which intervene between our site and Hale Village. You've got several pockets of substantial woodland there, and Car Lane to the west, which also helps to enclose the site in a kind of a medium to longer term distance views. Just on the issue of compensatory measures, you'll again have seen from our submissions, Harworth Group obviously control a larger area of land than we're currently talking about in the draft plan. It's a substantial area, so it's greenfield in nature, and we've shown in our master plan how there is plentiful land to accommodate additional green infrastructure should it be required at the planning application stage, and certainly there would be land in addition to that which is within this plan and within our master plan available for recreation, leisure, public rights of way, ecological enhancements, and generally greenbelt compensation. So if there's certainly of all the sites in this plan, it's not one to be concerned about, as we're very confident we can deliver.
Okay. And just before we go out, to just ask the other participants, just the council could just outline the specific exceptional circumstances to alter the Greenbelt in this particular location, what they think, and also.
Again, sir, we dealt with some of this similar matters regarding some of the other sites yesterday and the day before. The council believes that exceptional circumstances have been demonstrated to show that there is insufficient land, developable land within the urban area to meet the development requirements of the borough, and we have no option but to recourse to the Greenbelt. We've come to that conclusion following the process of doing the search. Obviously looking to identify sites within our own urban area, and through the duty to cooperate, negotiations or consultations with our neighbouring authorities, each of which is already going into the green belt to meet their own development requirements. We had a quick run through the sites, the authorities yesterday. I said they're within the same housing market area as St Helens and Warrington, usually referred to as the Mid-Mersey housing market area. St Helens is currently at examination with their plan, which is proposing significant greenbelt release in order to meet their own development requirements. Warrington is progressing their own local plan. I believe they will probably be submitting later this year, which is proposing huge areas of greenbelt release in order to meet their development requirements. Knowsley on the western side of us adopted their local plan about 4 years ago, and again that included significant greenbelt release in order to meet their development requirements. Liverpool's plan is currently at examination, and whilst Liverpool City doesn't have significant areas of greenbelt, they are looking at releasing some areas of greenbelt for specific purposes to meet their identified development requirements. So effectively, there's not the opportunity to displace unmet need to a neighbouring authority. So unfortunately, the council has no option but to other than recourse to looking at our own green belt.
Okay, Mr. Eason.
Thank you. Just on the exceptional circumstances case, I don't know whether, I think the council had discussed what they suggest would be the proper approach to the exceptional circumstances test. So insofar as they've got anything to say, that they can perhaps follow the fairly simple points I'm going to make. Our view about exceptional circumstances is that it is a broad brush assessment. So one takes into account a variety of factors, which inevitably in this case are going to include a strategic consideration of housing need and available supply. It is possible to take into account site specifics when one comes to the overall judgment about exceptional circumstances, but it is not necessary in each and every case to demonstrate there are exceptional circumstances to allow the release of a specific site. And so what I would counsel against is the idea that there's essentially a two-stage process. The first being, are there exceptional circumstances at a plan level, and then go on to consider site specifics. Because in that way, there is at least the potential that one introduces a site-specific, very special circumstances test, and you're essentially double counting. So that's my overview, and to the extent that one needs to consider exceptional circumstances in relation to individual sites, I broadly agree with what Mr. Cross has said in respect of W24. But can I just mention 6 brief points in relation to W24? That we naturally are going to rely upon the exceptional circumstances at a strategic level, which principally relate to the need for additional housing and the unavailability of urban non-greenbelt sites. There is a limited number of parcels in this area which would have a lesser impact on greenbelt purposes than the proposed allocation. We say that our site would represent a logical and sustainable extension to the existing urban area. There are no preferable sites in this area that could contribute towards meeting the obvious need for additional housing that are sustainable, suitable, available and deliverable. We say that each of those 4 matters is delivered by our site. There are no insurmountable site-specific constraints, and you will have seen from our hearing statement, sir, that a considerable amount of upfront preparatory work has been done on behalf of my clients, including, for example, recently ecological surveys and bird surveys. So the amount of upfront work that has been done is significant. It means that we would be fairly ready to go if an allocation were we'll come on to deliverability, but I just headline this point at this stage of the hearing to say that it wouldn't take an inordinate amount of time to submit an application. It will deliver substantial socioeconomic and environmental benefits. Penultimately, as you've touched on already, there is, given the size of the land holdings in which Harworth Group have an interest, there are considerable opportunities to provide not only compensatory green belt, but also biodiversity net gain. And finally, sir, just draw your attention to paragraph 141 of the MPPF, which enjoins local authorities to positively enhance the beneficial use of green belts, for example, by providing opportunities for access, outdoor sport and recreation. One point that hasn't yet been picked up is that there is currently no public access to the site. So the ability to reflect and respond to those specific requirements in paragraph 141, providing outdoor opportunities for recreation, public access, etc., is one of the very significant benefits of this particular proposal. Thank you very much.
I think on the last point, there's a public right of way that goes through the site, as far as I'm aware. Just obviously.
Yes. Okay.
It's just that will be picked up, I think, obviously. But yeah, I think from what I can see. But thank you for that. That's very, very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, sir. So just to pick up on the first issue raised by Mr. East in relation to the exceptional circumstances test. So I mentioned yesterday that the council was intending to submit a note to try and assist the examination on that. We have submitted one this morning, which was drafted by me. I won't read through it all. I don't know if it's made its way through to you, and it almost certainly hasn't made its way through to everybody else anyway. But just the key, I just want to pick up a key point from it. I've gone through the relevant provisions of the MPPF and especially the most recent case law in Compton Parish Council, Keepbourne Green End, and then looking back at what was said in the Calverton Parish Council case. And one of the issues that arises for that is the extent to which general or strategic housing need and the unmet nature of it can amount to very special circumstances. That was particularly an issue in the Keepbourne Green case. And the argument was raised that the existence of an unmet, objectively assessed need couldn't, on its own, amount to exceptional circumstances. That was decisively rejected by Mr. Justice Holgate, and I won't go through the detail of it, but the upshot is that he endorsed what was said by Mr. Justice Ousley in Compton, that, and I'll just cite this bit, general planning needs, for example, general housing, are not excluded from amounting to exceptional circumstances. The need doesn't have to relate to a specialist form of housing or a particular level of intensity. And what Mr. Justice Holgate went on to say was, what the MPPF, he was looking at the MPPF 2012, but I don't think it has any material difference with the current MPPF in this respect. He said that the mere identification of housing need or unmet housing need cannot be assumed, he emphasised the word assumed, by itself to constitute an exceptional circumstance to justify an alteration. But it doesn't follow that it's incapable of amounting to exceptional circumstances. Whether it does so is a matter of judgment for the decision maker, depending on how much significance or weight the decision maker attaches to that identified need. So the upshot is that the law is that general housing needs and its unmet nature can amount to exceptional circumstances. That whether it does or not is not to be assumed, but is to be judged by the decision maker in the facts of the case, and that's so whether or not it's combined with other factors. So that's the legal position. And so you've obviously heard representations from Mr. Easton and Mr. Cross pointing out actually that there are site-specific issues here which help justify this particular site being released from the Greenbelt, as with the other sites that you've already considered. So slightly different there. But I just thought I wanted to set that out as a matter of law to help with the examination process.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Okay. I was going to open it up now, just generally to the wider participants, just to go, just to pick up on the general discussion we've had regarding the overview, the points made regarding the Greenbelt findings, and then obviously the exception circumstance. So, Mr. Lander, if you want to pick up on the points that have been raised, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. I just would like to refer, if I may, because we've been talking about boundaries, I would like to refer to paragraph 139 of MPPF, which stresses that in reviewing greenbelt boundaries, it advises identifying areas which in order to meet long-term development needs, and boundaries, and defining boundaries which clearly use physical features that are readily recognizable and likely to be permanent. That's paragraph 139F, which I'm sure you're familiar with, sir. The point I would like to make is that, and it has been referred to, the boundaries, particularly on the western and southern edge of this site, are particularly weak, and part of the council's case is about creating strong boundaries, but that's not the requirement of a sound plan. The boundaries are weak on the western and southern edge presently. It's not about creating boundaries. With regard to the perimeter edge, the Hale Bank Road and Hale Gate Road, yes, are boundaries which define the site at the perimeter, but they don't provide containment to the west and the south. Hale Bank Road has really no development along it, along the length of this site. It's completely open land. It's enclosed by a hedgerow. If this site is developed, there will be a significant suburbanising effect in that location. Similarly, the character of development alongside Hale Gate Road, in the council statement, they refer to it as dense ribbon development. Well, that is not, that's a contradiction in terms. Ribbon development is not dense, it's linear. And in this particular case, the frontages are broken, it's not continuous development. So the containment on Hale Bank Road or the character change will be very significant. When we heard from the developer, there was reference made to compensatory measures, and you'll have to forgive me, sir, I've not read that statement, but I picked up from the comments made that compensation would be provided off-site, in which case that's operational development in the green belt, which will have an impact. Finally, yes, just coming back to the public right-of-way, there is public access right through the middle of the site. There's an existing footpath. It's a footpath which you may have already walked already, sir, but I would certainly encourage you to do so. It's a wonderful experience walking through it. The hedgerows are absolutely wonderful. They're full of bird life at the moment, as indeed are the hedgerows along Hale Bank Road. It's very evident at the moment. And clearly this, if the site is allocated, if it is released from the Greenbelt, there will be very significant environmental changes to this location, and certainly the character along Hale Bank Road. Thank you. That's all the points I wish to make at the moment.
Yes, Ms. Ladd, I did walk along the footpath. Yes, I did sort of to obviously give me a very good view of the site from basically the interior. So yes, I did take that walk when I was on site. So thank you for that. If I could just ask the council just to pick up on some of those points that Mr. Landers made. Obviously, particularly, obviously the points were made about obviously the MPPF, obviously in defining boundaries. Looking for physical features that are readily recognisable and permanent. If you obviously pick up that, and then obviously the other concerns regarding the suburbanisation of the actual area, impact on the character, and then I'll come back to the compensatory issue shortly.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, yes, we are aware of the stipulations of the MPPF, and particularly regarding the boundaries. I think, from the Greenbelt study, you can see that the council has taken those issues very seriously, and we have assessed all potential boundaries, existing boundaries within the Greenbelt. In this particular location, the boundaries are particularly weak, and we don't dispute that. We would obviously say that the existing greenbelt boundary along the western edge of Hale Gate Road, where it's made up of residential back gardens, is equally already very weak. Where there are strong boundaries available, as you'll have noticed from previous sessions and regarding other greenbelt sites, where strong boundaries are available, yes, the council has sought to utilise those. Unfortunately, in this position, in this particular location, short of basically filling in the triangle made by Hale Gate Road, Hale Bank Road, and the other road down to Hale, there's not the strong boundaries available. We believe that the strong boundaries can be created as part of the development, and we would definitely be seeking to achieve that. And I believe the evidence put before you from Harworth shows equally that they are looking to establish strong defensible boundaries as part of the development.
And just to pick up on the issues regarding obviously the significant suburbanisation, the issues relating to density and the character of the area that obviously were just raised by the participants. Well, obviously it touches on some of the purposes there, but what's your assessment of those, please?
Yes, thank you, sir. Again, I think I see the reference to dense urban development. I think we are sort of nitpicking, taking issue with that. Obviously, yes, the development, the housing development along the western side of Hale Gate Road is not continuous. There are large gaps. However, if you visited the site, you will have noticed that the housing development on the eastern side of Hale Gate Road is dense. There's no breaks, and there's very narrow gaps between the houses. So it does have a strong visual encroachment into the green belt in terms of an urban form.
Okay. Can I just refer back to the council, the developers, just relating to this compensatory improvements? Mr. Land is under the impression that that would be off-site. Just to be clear, obviously from your discussion, what were you intending with that compensatory improvements, on-site or off-site? Just to be clear, Mr. Valerie.
So I think there's the option to do both. Again, our Appendix 1, Matter 12, you'll see quite a lot of green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, informed by our drainage assessment on site. I think the public right-of-way, which you walked down, is actually shown as being retained in the master plan. It's green, it's significant. And so, sir, we feel that the compensatory measures can be achieved on site. The point I was making earlier was Harworth's commercial arrangements, as you'll see from our submissions, are with the Hesketh Estate, a private landowner. And therefore there is additional land available, sir, to the west and south of this site should it be needed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Easton?
So can I just carry on that point in relation to compensatory improvements? The policy test is in references in paragraph 138 of the MPPF, which talks about compensatory improvements to the environmental quality and accessibility of remaining greenbelt land. Now, whether that is provided on-site or off-site or a combination of both, it doesn't necessarily involve operational development in the greenbelt. Because in fact, if a parcel of off-site land remained open and undeveloped, that would meet and managed for environmental purposes, that wouldn't involve any development, but would meet the objective of providing compensatory improvements, even if it were necessary to carry out some sort of operational development in order to facilitate public access. One notes from paragraph 145B of the framework that provision about appropriate facilities for outdoor sport, recreation, etc. is not necessarily inappropriate, provided they preserve openness to the green belt and don't conflict with the purposes of including land within it. So, for example, if a new footpath were created across the compensatory parcels of greenbelt land, with a number of benches so people can enjoy the area. It's unlikely, in my view, that will be inappropriate development in the green belt. And then can I just deal with one other policy point, which is the defensible boundaries. Paragraph 139F does refer to defining boundaries clearly using physical features that are readily recognisable, unlikely to be permanent. I don't read anything in paragraph 139, particularly that part of it, that suggests that it is not possible to create defensible boundaries where the existing boundaries are already weak. In fact, my submission to the examination would be in circumstances where the boundaries are weak and they are to be redefined, one should positively plan to create new defensible long-term permanent boundaries. That's the clear policy thrust from paragraph 139. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does any other contributions in relation to the points being raised in relation to Mr. Landers in relation to the green belt and what's been said, please?
I think as a general point, I would possibly concede, if I could put it that way, that the site which adjoins or is adjacent to Hale Bank Road and is enclosed by the PROW, the public right-of-way, there is visual containment around that site. But I think the land to the south, I think on any reasonable assessment, there is absolutely no containment to that site. The frontage is broken. Mr. Cross referred to continuous development along Halegate Road, but that's on the other side of the road. It's not on the side which is currently in Greenbelt now. And obviously, we don't know what development's going to take place outside the site, but I disagree with Mr. Easton. Any development outside the sites, it might be a SUD scheme, it might be some recreational opportunity, it requires operational development because it requires access. People have got to get to it. So it's a total nonsense to suggest that off-site compensatory measures can be provided without operational development. So I fundamentally disagree. And I fundamentally disagree about the approach. You can create strong boundaries on any site, but here the requirement is to use physical features that are recognisable and permanent. And when I look at our involvement with other local plans in the Northwest, these permanent boundaries, they might be motorways, they might be railways, you're building up to that containment. You're not creating boundaries. That can be achieved on any site. This is a site which is to be released from the green belt and is to provide containment thereafter. It doesn't meet the test. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Scott, just that the point raised, I'll come back to the developers in a minute. Just the point raised about obviously the top end of the site being obviously where the public path runs, and obviously there's a hedge line there that being more contained than the southern part of the site. Did you just give me just a response on that particular point? Obviously, in terms of the issues relating to the northern part as opposed to the southern part of the site in relation to W24.
Yes, thank you, sir. As I say, we've done a comprehensive assessment of the potential boundaries. I believe, as I say, that Potter's Lane is assessed as being a moderate boundary that would contain a very small area of development land, and wouldn't go significantly far enough to meet the shortfall in the development land identified to meet the development needs of the local communities. The only strong boundaries present within the area are effectively the Halebank Road, Halegate Road, and Carr Lane. And I'm assuming that Mr. Landor is not recommending that we build out the entirety of that land in order to establish a greenbelt release based on existing strong boundaries. I think obviously the guidance is the guidance, and it has to be taken in the context of the physical circumstances on the ground. There is a complete lack of strong boundaries within this location, which is not unique to this site. In the discussion yesterday regarding the safeguarded land at Pex Hill, a similar situation that the northern boundary that would potentially form the new greenbelt boundary is weak in that location. However, it was felt that a strong boundary could be created to prevent further urban sprawl or further encroachment into the greenbelt, and we would contend that that's very much the situation that pertains here.
Okay, thank you. I'll just come back to Mr. Valerie and Mr. Eason, just obviously the 2 points there, if I could, just regarding, obviously the issue of containment of the site, as I think we touched on already, but also the operational development question that was just raised regarding Mr. Eason's comments, please.
Yeah, so just a short point on encroachment and boundaries. Ultimately, we have to take a view of this examination on the evidence before the examination. So I would refer you to the maps within the Council's Greenbelt assessments, notably Greenbelt Review Map 11. And so we can see when we look at that, to the eastern boundary, we have the large field boundary there with high visual encroachment, other pockets of high visual encroachment along the eastern boundary, and the balance of the sites are noted as having partial visual encroachment. So I won't label the point, but the evidence is there on a variety of the maps within the Greenbelt assessment, which shows if you go in to expand the urban area, this is the least sensitive location to the south of Widnes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eason.
So I agree with everything that Mr. Valley has just said. In terms of compensatory improvements, I think I was quite careful to point out that there are different objectives when it comes to compensatory improvements in terms of environmental quality and also accessibility. So it would be within the council's gift to say which of those they would prefer, or a combination of the two. And the reason I referred to paragraph 145 was that to the extent that any operational development is required in order to deliver compensatory improvements, it wouldn't necessarily be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. So I'm not saying that operational development could never happen, but what I am saying is that to deliver a positive objective that the NPPF requires when Greenbelt releases are anticipated, it clearly envisages a situation where some operational development might be required to deliver improved accessibility or environmental quality. So it's not a process that is objected to or resisted by the NPPF. It's positively encouraged to the extent that it delivers those compensatory improvements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Landers.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, sir. I'm not sure I've got any additional points to make.
That's fine. Your hand is still raised, so I'll just obviously
containment, and I've made the point about operational development, and I've heard the responses. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you just thank you very much. Take your hand down. Thank you very much. Is there any other points raised in relation to discussions now on Greenbelt at this stage? If not, I'm going to move on to the scale and development capacity basic issue, just in relation to W24 first. So the council could just how long was the site, how the site area and development capacity was determined, what assumptions were determined, what evidence, and basically I'll just get the developer's view on whether they agree on the approach that was taken, whether that took into account any constraints and provision necessary infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. The W24, the capacity, again, was just assessed using the standard methodology adopted by the council across the range of sites. We've taken the site area, applied a notional developable area figure as informed by the evidence base, and multiplied by 30 dwellings per hectare. As the site's more than 5 hectares in size, the development area assumption is 70%. So it's 23 hectares times 70 times 30 gives a notional capacity of 484.
Okay.
And that's set out in our response to question 12B5.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just the developer's perspective, if we just give their views really, please, on this particular matter.
Yes, so I think Mr. Easton might want to come in after me possibly, but just to say we're fairly happy with the council's arithmetic. They made assumptions around 30 dwellings per hectare, which we feel is reasonable. Will allow for the green infrastructure I mentioned, provision of the link road, and also means sure that across the site we can have some areas perhaps that will be more dense than others with a filtering towards the southern and western edges. So we're happy with the assumption on the basis that it is I think referred to as a notional number.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come in, Mr. Eason, or?
No, so I'd only add this. I mean, I do appreciate that other site promoters of allocations have advocated a higher density figure, but I think the point Mr. Velez has made is that such is the extent of harvest land holdings here, that there could be an average density across the entire site, but to respond to specific pockets or challenges or constraints, there could be areas of higher density, there could be areas of lower density. And I would just reiterate his point that the plan as written at the moment indicates that this is a notional figure, and we would resist any suggestion that the identified capacity at plan level is somehow a cap or a ceiling on the number of houses that can be delivered through this allocation. And provided that's understood and is made clear in the plan, I don't think we have much more to add in respect to the council's approach. We will naturally come on to deal with whether or not the size of the allocation and its arrangement is something that we think is the most appropriate, but I'll wait till we come to that point to make comments on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other points on scale and capacity in relation to W24 at this stage? I'm going to, otherwise I'll just ask the council's view just on the W45, just again, the small parcels really, again, in relation to those, how they've arrived at those figures.
Again, the calculation set out in our response to 12B5, it's the same calculation. The site's smaller at 2.26 hectares in total, so the developable area assumption is higher at 80%. So it's 2.26 times 80% times 30 dwellings per hectare gives a notional capacity of 54 across the three parcels.
Okay. If there's no other points to raise in relation to this scale and dwelling capacity, I'm just going to move on to the potential adverse impacts and mitigation. So just if I could ask the council just in the first instance, just in relation to site W24, could they just outline the potential adverse impacts of developing the site and how they could be mitigated, leaving out the highways issue? If you could just we shall deal with after this on the agenda, please.
Thank you, sir. Again, we set out the summary table showing the results of the sustainability appraisal that looked at 17 objectives. Identifies the main negative impact as being on soil, and that's effectively the loss of agricultural land. It also identifies potential negative impacts across the different parcels, heritage, water, and health. Again, the heritage will just reflect the loss of the valuable agricultural land and any heritage assets that are within the vicinity, or potential impact on any heritage assets within the vicinity, which, as I say, is not a prohibitive constraint. In terms of health, it will be proximity to local health facilities, because obviously the site doesn't have local health facilities within the prescribed distance as set out in the assessments.
Okay, thank you. I think you've helpfully submitted after our discussions yesterday a plan now regarding agricultural land classifications. I think that's been submitted into the library. Basically in terms of the agricultural land classification, I understand basically I think it's all grade 2, apart from obviously the land that's built on built on along the Hellgate Road and basically Hellbank Road. So is that right, grade 2?
I believe so, sir.
Okay, thank you. And just this point, I think we raised it again yesterday. Obviously the areas covered by landscape character area and the site assessments, including UDP important landscape features. Again, it's obviously what are those? If you're aware of what those important landscape features are and how landscape issues would be addressed, potential impact issues would be addressed.
Sorry, so that's all been summarised in the individual site appraisals. I assume that the identified features will probably contain issues such as hedgerows and the proximity to the ancient woodlands that lie to the south and west of the site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just before I move on to other basically just other sort of issues, could I just ask the developer's view based on this, on the potential adverse impacts of the development, just as an overview basically before we look at some specifics and how they can be mitigated. Obviously I've touched on one or two already in terms of agricultural land, the landscape issues. If we could just really just touch on their sort of take on this, please.
So I'm quite happy to handle this. I mean, what will be helpful in your consideration of these points is to have a look at Appendix 3 to our hearing statement, which is a summary finding. So that's summary findings of the technical work that's been undergone so far. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I make the introductory point that it's pretty clear that a very substantial amount of upfront work has already been done on behalf of Harworth Group to identify particular constraints and to come up with a number of solutions as to how to overcome them. So and you will also, Mr. Villali has also referred you already to the master plan, which is an Appendix 1 to the hearing statement, which demonstrates, along with the development statement, that the care that has already gone into identifying the best way to develop the site. So we are pretty confident, sir, that insofar as there are identified constraints, whether that's ecology, landscape, accessibility, flood risk, agricultural land value, they've all been identified. And through a detailed master planning exercise and an application stage, there is absolutely no reason why they can't be overcome satisfactorily. I don't know if Mr. Villali's got anything to add to what I've just said. No, he shakes his head, so thank you, sir.
Okay, just on one of the points, obviously, just relating to ecology, biodiversity. Obviously, in the Appendix 3, obviously there's a very brief summary, I think, found there regarding the findings of the work. I wonder just obviously in terms of they could just state how one of the main ecological constraints like to be present from the nearby Mersey Estuary SPA and Ramsar site, how that would be addressed, just if it could be clear on those particular points. Obviously, you could probably, I think your summary gives an overview basically, but I wonder if you just touch on how basically the biodiversity issues would be addressed, and then also just to zoom in on this particular issue regarding the nearby Mersey Estuary Special Protection Area Ramsar site.
Yes, so from the ecological work which has been undertaken and indeed refreshed very recently, two key issues really. One, the potential presence of great crested newts. eDNA surveys have been undertaken this year which have indicated there aren't any on the site. And the second core issue, sir, would be the breeding birds, overwintering birds, which you'll be aware of from previous discussions. So we've sought through the master plan at Appendix 1 to have some pretty significant areas of open grassland within the master plan, sir, to accommodate any kind of populations that are currently using the site as a form of mitigation, sir. And of course, we have the additional land to the south and the west under our control, which I referred to earlier, which could come into play there as well in terms of compensatory habitat, sir.
Okay. Just the council's view, basically, if they agree with the obviously at this stage with the findings, particularly obviously in relation to the impact on the ecological, the SPA, and the Ramsar site of the Mersey estuary.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think it was touched on yesterday that following the publication draft of the local plan, that Natural England identified a requirement to undertake an overwintering or non-breeding bird survey to identify any areas of land within the borough that were potentially supporting habitat. That was carried out by Avian Ecology, and the summary document is EL010. That effectively identified that whilst birds, some of the bird species do use some of the fields in this locality, that the proposed allocation sites themselves were not identified as supporting habitat, and therefore that was not a restrictive issue in terms of bringing the sites forward for development. Obviously, the council commissioned a single-year survey, and bringing the site forward, it will need to be supported by additional bird surveys. Natural England expects to see information over a number of seasons, a number of years, not just a one-year snapshot. And I believe that the Harbours Group have demonstrated that they are aware of that and have been addressing that issue. So we are content that the allocations as proposed are not supporting habitat, and that is not an impediment to the delivery.
Mr. Barry, just on the point, and obviously ongoing surveys as well, just the points to raise.
Thank you, sir. Just a general point to make that we're obviously acutely aware of the wider context of the site in terms of the protected and designated habitat areas. So it probably won't surprise you to hear that in terms of looking ahead, and our advice to our group would be to err on the side of caution with this planning application, and therefore we'd be looking at an EIA to accompany that application. And so that would look and scope up front, obviously, with the council and the relevant statutory consultees, including Natural England, the scope of surveys and information required, not least assessing any potential impacts on those designated habitat areas.
Okay, thank you. Could just open it up to others, just on the general points made at this stage. We will move on to some of the other sort of constraints if anybody wants to raise any particular points on the matters raised at this stage regarding landscape biodiversity, etc. No, okay. Could I just pick up on just the site, basically, the site assessments show obviously that the W24 is within the middle and outer zone of a hazardous installation. The council have provided us maps, and a draft statement of common ground, I think, now has been submitted, that I think has been added to the website at as post submission documents at PS07 and PS09. I wonder if the council could just give me the agreed position basically in relation to W24 at this stage, how those are going to be addressed in relation to this particular site, and is there any reasons why the development can't be developed in accordance with the council's policies on managing pollution and risk?
Thank you, sir. I think in terms of the status of the document submitted yesterday, if Mr. Gibbs is available, he can probably deal with that. And also we have Mr. Hopwood available in terms of technical issues regarding the paddy zones.
Okay, if one of those gentlemen, Ms. Hopkins, I would just basically, if you could just give me an issue of how this would be dealt with in this particular site.
Yes, thank you, sir. There are two installations nearby to W24, which are designated as major hazard sites.
Ms. Howard, I think you've broken down. I've lost you there. Could you try again? Ms. Hartwood, could you try again? Your voice disappeared then. Okay, I wonder if somebody else on the council could just, if possible, whilst Mr. Hartwood is hopefully going to come back to us, just summarise. I think from what I can see, obviously the latest information, just give a sort of brief summary of the position and how it might be dealt with, if that's okay, please.
If you bear with me, I'll do my best, sir. I see Mr. Gibbs has been leading discussions with the Health and Safety Executive.
Mr. Gibbs, if that's okay, if he's
I think Mr. Gibbs might actually just be indisposed at the moment.
Okay,
I think
that's absolutely fine.
He's with the leader, unless he's just popped up. Oh, there he is.
He's just coming. Yes, yeah. If that's helpful as well, please. Just really, obviously, Mr. Hotwood unfortunately dropped out his voice, so it's just really. We just, in terms of the site assessments, obviously they've identified W24 has been in the middle and outer hazard zone. I don't know whether you heard the discussion there. If you could just summarise what the agreed position is in relation to this site and how it would be dealt with, whether it would be dealt with within the policy framework you've agreed with the HSE, please.
Thank you. So yeah, it would do. W24 is within the outer zone, and the position of HSE is that they don't object to residential development in the outer zone. So I think with regard to W24, there isn't an issue. There's nothing between the council and the HSE in terms of that site.
There's just a small corner of the site, I noticed, obviously from the maps you produce, obviously is in the middle zone as well, just to be clear. The top sort of south, the southwest corner against Halebank Road, I noticed that sort of strays into the middle zone. Just to be clear, obviously, that how that would be dealt with as well.
Yeah, the council's position is, I think, when we get to a planning application stage and detailed layout, those type of boundary issues could be taken into account then, and the development shape to avoid the inner zone. Again, HSE's position with middle zone development is that they would allow housing up to, I think, 30 units within that area. So again, I think that a development at the point comes forward can accommodate HSE's advice with regard to the W24 site.
Okay, then we might have to Mr. Hotwood back as well, just to.
Thank you, sir, and apologies. A good old broadband crash there. I'll be on to the provider later. Yeah, so and I missed what Mr. Gibbs has just been saying, so apologies. I don't want to repeat things. But just to pick up on that point, yes, W24 sits in the mainly in the outer zone, and apart from a development that involves a large fun fair that draws in lots and lots of people outside, in terms of housing development, there shouldn't be too many problems with regard to advice that HSE may give on a planning application in that area. The W24 does sit into the middle zone, just by a small percentage. The map I've been provided shows 7% into the middle zone. HSE do advise against high density housing and more than 30 units within the middle zone. But since this is a small percentage, there is guidance on so-called straddling sites. And if it's less than 10% into the more constrained zone, then it's actually the outer it's the outer band that's taken as being determining. So W24 would be considered to be in the outer zone for HSE advice.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask the developer's view on this as well, just if they agree, just obviously in terms of looking at their technical assessment, please.
Yes, so we agree with the council, and we've made a note in our submissions. Essentially, we're aware of that small element of the site which falls within the middle zone, so we certainly will see this as a development management issue to be addressed, as Mr. Gibbs has said, through a planning application. Of interest to what Mr. Hopwood has just said, obviously, that actually the site as a whole would not be a concern to the HSE, but certainly any issues that might come up, we would certainly deal with them through the master planning exercise. We're comfortable that can be addressed.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to move across the road actually to W45 just briefly whilst we're on this point. Just briefly whilst Mr. Hopwood is with us. Obviously, just in terms again that sort of there's a number of parcels of land on sort of the north side of Hellbank Road. Again, they're much smaller parcels, but again fall into middle and outer zone as well, from what I can see. Again, just if you confirm the approach is if the agreed approach on these as well, please.
Yeah, certainly, sir. At the time of planning application for those areas, the HSE have to be consulted, and they will advise based on the fact that these parcels, or some of these parcels, do sit in the middle zone. And so they will be looking at, basically, if it's housing, it will be looking at the density of housing. There's a restriction, or sorry, not a restriction, but advice that developments up to 30 dwelling units are okay, and a density of no more than 40 per hectare. So if it was, if the proposal was outside that, then they may advise against their alternative approach. They are purely advisory in HSE in this, and so it may be that they just do not advise against.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to just take a break now before I just move on. Basically, I think there's just one or two of the items I want just to cover based on potential adverse impacts, but I think it's 11 o'clock, so I'm just going to break till 20 past 11. Please just let people have a short screen break, and then we'll come back then if we could for this site. Thank you very much. We'll adjourn the hearing. Okay, it's 20 past 11. I'm just going to carry on with the other issues. Basically, I just wanted to cover under the potential basically adverse impacts, if I could. Just briefly, and again, I noticed obviously, and I think it's been picked up before in previous basically discussions on other sites, that the site assessments in these, and for W24 picks up on a small percentage of potentially contaminated land on the site. I don't know if the council know where this is and how it might be addressed, and then I might ask the developers whether they've been aware of anything through their technical assessments. Mr. Cross.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I was looking at this issue for you last night, and I'm in a position I can submit a map to the examination tomorrow. Effectively, I've prepared a map that looks at the potentially contaminated land register, and that looks at the water features, or the former water features. I have to admit, I was quite gobsmacked myself in terms of the sheer number of former ponds that have been identified across the borough. You could practically skip from one side of the town to the other without actually having to set foot on dry land. But that's effectively the issue that's been identified is former ponds or former water features that have been backfilled. We can submit that plan for you tonight, and it'll be available for you tomorrow. That shows the extent.
Okay, thank you very much. Just the developers, just in terms of their technical assessments of the site, whether they picked up any contaminated land issues.
Yeah, so we've had a phase one desk study undertaken, and nothing has come out of note. So in addition to what Mr. Cross has just referenced, nothing of concern, as you might expect for a predominantly greenfield site.
Okay, thank you. The other point I just wanted to pick up on was just a point that was made in the Hale Parish Council submission, just of the surface area flooding, obviously around, it was around Potter's Lane. Obviously they've submitted some evidence. Just obviously, can the developers and the council just tell me how they intend to deal with the issue of surface area flooding identified along Halebank Road, please? But just know with the council, and then obviously move on to the developers, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. We did identify quite early on in the process the identification of areas of higher risk of surface water flooding, and that the information was relayed to the developers. I'm sure that either Mr. Farmer or Ms. Parr will be able to provide you technical details on the scale and the implications for that on this site.
Okay, Mr. Yeah.
Yes, so just on the flood and drainage points dealt with at our appendix 3, sir, but we would say one of the benefits of the scheme overall from a sustainability perspective would obviously be the reduction in runoff from the site at present with Greenfield plus climate change, and that target's obviously ever increasing. And so where there may be localised issues, certainly that's not reflected in the designation of the site because it's obviously within flood risk zone 1. Where there are surface water issues and runoff issues, and where we have the ability to deal with those through the creation of SODS features, infiltration, so on, we would do those and hopefully sort of be able to alleviate, if it's possible, any current ponding or surface water gathering off-site.
Okay, thanks. Just the developers, sorry, the council, do they agree with basically the approach that you've initially discussed with the developers, either Mr. Farmer or Mrs. Parr, please? How that might be dealt with?
Yes. In general, when the majority of the flood risk on site is surface water flooding, it's very localised into where some of the previous ponds were on site. There's a smooth that goes through that should be able to be dealt with at application stage just by normal mitigation measures. With regards to Potter's Lane, the flooding that was seen in January, which I'm sure the parish council were picking up on is actually it correlates very well with the surface water flood maps provided by the Environment Agency and modelling in that area. So we're very confident that as long as those are used as the basis for any mitigation, that we should be able to mitigate the flood risk.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Landers, please, to come in there.
Thank you, sir. Just a point of clarification, I hope. In the submissions we made, we provided 4 photographs. What was it, 6, is it? I can give you the locations on page 6.
Yes, I've seen those. Yes, that's why I referred obviously the council really just to sort of just if they could address those particular points. But I think
I'm just going to say where they were because we haven't very helpfully labelled them.
Yeah. Okay, please. Yeah.
The top right hand side is number 68 Halebank Road. The bottom left hand side is 153 Halebank Road, and the right hand side bottom photograph on page 6 is somewhere between 62 and 54 Halebank Road, but that's of the allocated sites. My view is that water's coming from the north, and the surface water flood maps sort of show that the problem's further north is coming from the north, from maybe towards the Alstom, somewhere there, and that's how it's flooding the road and flooding the proposed allocated site. And I accept that the developers, whoever develops this site, if it's allocated, will produce a SUD scheme that will cope with runoff at a greenfield rates for their sites. But from what I've heard, I haven't heard anything that's going to resolve the problem you see in those pictures. That's the point I'd like to make. Thank you, sir.
Miss Farr, do you want to just come back on that? Obviously, it sounds like there's various locations. Obviously, it sounds like obviously the flooding photographs that were submitted to us along Halebank Road. So just wanted to come back on that, please, and how that might be addressed, particularly if it is coming in from land from the north, if that's the issue as well.
Yes. So we're currently undertaking a Section 19 investigation for the flooding in those areas because property number 66 and 68 had internal flooding during January. From the investigation so far, the water was coming from 2 locations, partly from the fields, coming over from the back of the fields down Potters Lane, over into the road towards those properties. And the resident at number 66 has security camera footage of the water encroaching from that area. This seems to be exacerbated by surface water flooding along the road due to blockages in the gullies, the highway gullies on the road, and those blockages have been since dealt with. So the water pathway is actually more from the south going up towards the north than from the north coming south, from our evidence collection so far.
Okay, that's grand. Just obviously, I picked up obviously the as well as the site to the south, around that Potters Lane junction, the land is part of the parcel land allocated, around I think it's in between 64 and 66 Halebank Road. So that would be potentially in the areas that might need to be looked at. Is that correct in terms of the surface area flooding? It would spread to areas to the north as well as the south, and that would need to be addressed. Is that right? And that can be, and that you think that obviously can be mitigated effectively. That's what you're looking to address.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Just before I move on, just briefly to site W45. Unless there's any other points that people want to raise, just the council consider obviously the policy safeguards proposed mitigation are sufficiently effective to address the potential adverse impacts on site W24 that we've addressed, please? Mr. Cross.
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Thank you. If I just move briefly on to W45, the small parcel of land, just if I could just cover just briefly the proposed potential adverse impacts and mitigations. So obviously we've touched on the surface water issue there and some of the parcels of land between 64 and 68 Hellboat Road, but I just wonder whether you could just give me an overview and how the potential adverse impacts are developing those infill sites and then obviously how they might be mitigated.
Thank you, sir. Again, the summary tables provided and our response to 12B.6 identifies the only negative potential impact is soil. So again, it's the loss of open land and potential minor negative impacts on water and health. Again, the health will be the same issue in terms of the proximity of primary healthcare facilities, and water will just be reference to nearby water courses. The development could drain into or potentially impact upon. So we think that this site has very few negative impacts that need to be mitigated, and that the site, any issues that arise can be dealt with through the normal development control processes.
And just the land, including in terms of the assessments of W45, the land is designated green spaces in the UDP. Obviously, at the hearings earlier this week, you did indicate that there's going to be an update on the open space study. Is that correct still? And what were the findings in relation to these proposed sites, and can they be mitigated?
I don't believe that the sites actually have public access. I believe they are all currently tenanted. The council is, looking to bring forward the sites to the market. The larger of the sites, I believe, it's tenanted to a single user. So you've got the residential property at the front and a sort of nursery type unit at the back. And I think the intention is that whenever the current lease expires, that the sites will be split, and the residential property will be disposed of, and the remaining land will be disposed of as a development opportunity separately. But they are not currently, public open space in terms of accessible to the public, so any impact on development is de minimis.
Okay, and just the points I was just asking about, obviously the updates on the open space study, and obviously the fact that these are, effectively designated green space at this stage, how that's going to be addressed.
Yes, we will. We're providing an update to the study. There's a little bit, in terms of a slightly different approach will be incorporated. The previous open space study basically assessed the provision of standards against what were known as area forums. Previously, the councils subdivided the borough into areas called area forums, which were mostly made up of about 3 borough electoral wards. And the members were quite keen because they had a little development pot funding available for minor works within each of those areas. The area forums have now effectively fallen by the wayside. They're no longer active, and as of last Thursday, the electoral wards have been completely redrawn in the borough. So the assessment is now, having discussed the issue with various other departments, we think the most appropriate assessment level will simply be north and south of the river. So whilst the data was presented previously, and I think you have had the open space calculator spreadsheet, which does set out the current standards on the old area forum boundaries, that will be now presented as north and south of the river. And we hope to get that to you by the end of the week.
And just really, does it go down to the finest? Obviously, because we've not actually seen the information in terms of how it impacts on this specific site. I just wanted to find out what the implications will be in terms of this for this site, in terms of the fact that it is designated green space. I just wanted to be clear on what the findings will be in relation to this site, if that's known at this stage.
Effectively, as I say, the sites are not publicly accessible. They are not public open space. And see, if they were counted, I'd have to check and see which typology they were counted under. If they were down counted as one of the supply typologies and not the excluded typology, then yes, the loss would reduce the total supply, would be discounted from the supply. But to say, I think, they say they're not currently publicly accessible, so the loss of these sites does not impact on the availability of open space to the general public. I would say that obviously if you look at the wider site just immediately to the north of W45, you're getting into the HBC field site, and you can see there that as part of that development, a large green space buffer was created between the potential employment development land and the residential properties to the east and Hale Bank. So that's a new public open space that has been provided since the previous open space study was undertaken. So there has been a gain, a very substantial gain of public open space within this area.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, I think that basically concludes my discussion on the proposed adverse impacts mitigation. Before I just move on to highways, just in terms of the highways issues, basically, obviously the transport network impact study that was undertaken as part of the local plan, and the Liverpool City Region Transport Model showed that there seemed to be an increase in traffic up to 2035, but did not identify any links around Hale Bank that would be over capacity, although there would be increased travel times noted along Hale Bank Road into the north of the village. Could I just get a view from the sort of Mr. Farmer, particularly just in relation to obviously the impact of this development generated on for W24 in terms of the bigger site, whether they considered any issues in terms of capacity on the highway network as a result of this development?
Thank you, sir. Yes, of course. Yes, as you've said, it's site W24 and 45 have been considered in the Mott MacDonald study, EL091 reference, and there's no local issues with capacity. I would note though that there is opportunity within the site development for a link road diversion between Hale Bank Road and Hale Gate Road, which would help relieve an existing junction, which perhaps not so much of a capacity issue, but is quite a tight junction in terms of visibility, the junction of Mersey Road and Hale Bank Road. If I can go into other accessibility by other modes at the moment, there's a number of bus services that serve the site. The 62 service split between Warrington and Arriva. Warrington buses and Arriva buses runs half hourly, and that terminates at Bagley Avenue. That service runs from Warrington via Runcorn into Widnes and then Hale Bank. Similarly, there's also the 82A service that operates through Hale Bank and Hale onto Liverpool again, coming from Runcorn and Widnes. Again, it's a half-hourly service, so the site is pretty well served in terms of bus services. There's also the proposal within the local plan to reopen Ditton Station as well, so I would suggest the sites are very well served in terms of public transport, and there's opportunity, perhaps as part of the link road arrangements that I've talked about there, to reroute buses to be closer to the development within compliance with other policies. In terms of more detailed access to the site, there's still to be considered in detail. Generally, we think accesses are achievable, but there's a bit more assembly required. If I could bring in my colleague, Mr. Peake, just to go to that, talk to that in a little bit more detail, please.
Mr. Peake, are you coming in there, please?
Apologies about that, sir. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Farmer. Microphone issues. Yeah, we've looked at the site W24 in some depth in conjunction with looking at some of the development proposals that have come through from the developer. And although the indicative schemes within the proposals aren't considered to be approved, what we would note is that there is extensive frontage to the north of the site that allows for connection onto the existing network and access from the east. Again, there are multiple possibilities of access points into the site, so it's considered to be accessible and linking to the network. Junction type and scale will be wholly dependent on the development as it comes forward into the number of dwellings and the associated trips generated. But as John, Mr. Farmer has pointed out, there is a substantial possibility of having a link road through the site that would relieve pressure on, as mentioned, the crossroad junction to the north. So we don't envisage any specific issues in terms of building out access onto the existing network. As I say, scale and type of junction may require additional land to be taken from the site, which will sort of impact on the developable area, but it's considered to be achievable and in proportional to the development.
Okay, and obviously you've indicated that there are opportunities for access both from Hale Bank Road and Hale Gate Road. This obviously you mentioned, obviously both of you mentioned, obviously, and the developers mentioned the link road. Is it basically, would that be required? I think you've indicated that there isn't highway issues overall, but could a first link of that be provided as part of this development as it's proposed? Do you envisage?
When we considered the site in its infancy on the original, when we were originally asked to comment on the site allocations, the area that was contained within the red line plan allowed for that sort of connection north-south, which would link the two the Hale Gates and the Hale Bank Road. It was our considered opinion that it would help movements from the site towards Liverpool and also from the site down towards sort of the further area. So it would also act for a bypass for traffic heading from the south, heading towards the northwest area. So it does have some benefits for wider traffic movements, but it would be a case of catering for the development in its initial stages. And the other point we would add is that having multiple points of access allows for resilience within design, which is helpful when roads are being adopted by the Highway Authority, which gives us maintenance opportunities, which is why for a development of this scale, we will be seeking for at least 2 points of access onto the network.
Okay, but just before I move, just get the development, the actual East Link Road, the actual development isn't dependent solely on that particular link road.
Not so much as a link road. It's more for wider benefits of the area. The developments within the original red line plan, we would still like to see our road connecting through to add resilience to allow people to exit the site in multiple directions. But it's a case of how the development comes forward in its internal road layout. There are possible options, but for a development of that number of dwellings, we would recommend that there would be 2 points of access, which would naturally lead towards a link road arrangement.
Okay, we'll just get the developers just input basically on what their view is in relation to the impacts on the local highway network, whether they agree with the council's assessment, obviously from their own work, and obviously the points raised in relation to the link road, whether that can be effectively the start of it can just link into the allocation as proposed.
Yes, sir. Thank you. In terms of impact, you'll note from our Appendix 4, Vectos Transport Consultants, our Master 12 statement of undertaking a traffic impact analysis, which broadly concurs with what you've just heard in terms of impacts on the network. So we're not envisaging any major issues, certainly nothing that would be approaching the severe test in the NPPF. The same vectors note which I referred to does look at, sir, in some detail as to the benefits of the link road, and the phrase I think we've used in our submission, sir, is that ultimately this would be in the best interests of the proper planning of the area, and certainly when you look at the master plan, it comes through that the 2 points of connection are key, really. I would agree with what Mr. Farmer has just said in terms of the need. I think we can definitely start to deliver W24 without the full link road in place. Certainly, we've got a defined access point in mind from Hale Gate Road to the east. I know that it was mentioned there are several options, but we've certainly got one in mind which would do the job, sir, and to start to be able to deliver the site. Obviously, in terms of the link road, there's 2 points I wanted to make on that. One was, yes, it's key to delivering the site, and as I say, in the interest of the proper planning of the area, and will benefit, obviously, the occupants of this site if it's allocated and developed out. But also, sir, there's a benefit to the wider highway network. Certainly, traffic that's seeking to head east or certainly west towards Liverpool currently traverses through Hale Bank. We're looking, sir, at another off-site enhancement, which I don't think's in the council's evidence base. It's something we've worked on leading up to the examination. We believe we could deliver, sir, through this development, an off-site enhancement at the A562 Higher Road Finch Lane junction. And so it would move that junction from being currently left only to an all moves junction, sir. So it would relieve the pressure which Mr. Farmer has talked about earlier on, and Mr. Peake through Hale Bank. Not that, and just to be clear, we're not saying, and we're in agreement with the council, there's not an existing highways issue which certainly would render the scheme unacceptable if the link road's not delivered, but sir, it certainly is a significant benefit of the scheme, and obviously you've seen our submissions on that.
Okay, thank you. Clear on that. Just the reference there to off-site enhancements, Mr. Farmer, that were referenced. If you just give me just a view on that, please, Mr. Peake.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the council will be supportive of the off-site improvements. Clearly, it would help move traffic away from Hale Bank. The junction that's being talked about with the A562 is outside of the Halton Borough, so will come under Nosby's jurisdiction. However, yeah, the Halton Council will be supportive as Highway Authority.
Okay. Does any of the participants wish to make any comments on the impacts on the local highway network and just the discussion regarding the link road? Just at this stage, we will sort of cover it a bit more later on. No, okay. Okay, thank you. Just in terms of the strategic road network, are there any sort of adverse impacts arising from the developments, in relation to basically SB24 or 45, the 2024, whether this would impact adversely and if they need to be mitigated? Mr. Cross or Mr. Farmer, please.
Thank you, Sarah. As we've said before, it's been considered through the Mott MacDonald model, and we've not noted any significant impacts on the link capacity within the model nearby the site. So yeah, any impacts here we think are going to be localised more to the site and its immediate vicinity and the junctions with the highway network in the area.
Okay, thank you. Just as a point of interest, on the smaller sites on W45, sites to the north of Hale Bank Road, is there any issues in relation to those in terms of highways issues in relation to those smaller sites? Just pick on those whilst I'm just on this point. Mr. Farmer.
Yes. there'll need to be more detailed considerations at the planning application stage of how those sites are accessed, how those junctions fit together with the access to W24, but we don't envisage any significant problems that can't be overcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to move on to infrastructure requirements and costs. Basically, if we cover the site W24, just the council state what the infrastructure requirements costs are and how they would be addressed. If we could just get the council's view on that first, please.
Thank you, sir. There hasn't been any additional infrastructure requirements identified, off-site infrastructure requirements identified to bring this site forward. You will obviously note, however, that the allocation does include the proposal for a reserved school site, which might run contrary to my comments from the previous days. Effectively, the current situation is that there is sufficient school capacity within the borough. We believe that there will be sufficient school capacity within the borough throughout the plan period. However, our school place planning team place one caveat upon that, and that is Hale Bank. And the reason that they raise the caveat with Hale Bank is that effectively, usually they can add additional capacity to existing facilities by the addition of new classrooms. That is not a possibility at Hale Bank School. I don't know if you managed to see Hale Bank Primary whenever you were doing your site visits. It's located just in the residential area to the north and east of W24. It's shown on the policies map as the green area with the C notation. That school was recently rebuilt on the existing site after, I think it's fair to say, a protracted dispute with the health and safety executive. The school site lies within the middle consultation zone for one of the hazardous installations, and the HSE's position was that they did not want to see the school rebuilt even on the same site at the same capacity. And they say there was quite a protracted process undertaken, which obviously finally resolved with the school being rebuilt on the existing site. But effectively there is no capacity or no opportunity to increase capacity at that school. As such, we have identified EDU3 as a potential reserve school site. I say there's not an identified hard requirement for that facility at present, and it's not necessarily envisaged that there will be a requirement, but it's a sort of I say it's been held in reserve in case the situation does alter during the plan period. We have been in consultation with the Harvard Group, and I believe they are supportive of the reservation of some of this land for the potential provision of a future school in area.
Just get the developer's perspective. Oh, Mr. Hotwood, do you want to just come in? It's relating to
yes, sir, thank you. Yeah, just to just point out that the advice from HSE is based not just on numbers of people and not just on density, but also on sensitivity of developments in terms of the types of people using them. Now, as a consequence of that, they would normally advise against schools being in any of the consultation zones, even the outer one. I've just noticed that EDU3 is in the, as Mr. Cross was explaining, is just in the outer zone. It is possible that HSE would advise against that, as indeed they must have advised against the one in the middle zone sometime before.
Okay, thank you. Just going to get the developer's just perspective on just this. I wanted to go on to just a little bit more about education, but just whether there were agreements on the approach taken at the moment in relation to primary school provision and allocation of the site.
Yes, so specifically on that point, we've nothing to add. Mr. Cross is correct. It's been raised throughout previous discussions. And in fact, a bit like the Lake Road, we see it as a sustainability benefit and the benefit of this scheme in general, sir.
Okay, thank you. Just whilst we're on education, Mr. Cross, could we just be obviously the discussion was obviously on secondary school capacity as well. Is that in terms of this particular location, is that similar to the discussion we've had elsewhere in terms of capacity within Widnes? Basically sufficient capacity to cater to the requirements. If you just confirm that for me, please.
Yeah, that's this.
Okay. And just again in discussion with basically the Council's Public Health team and the NHS Clinical Commissioning Group relating to GP facilities in the area, what's the agreed position in relation to this area, Hale Bank, please, and the development in question?
Yeah, again, sir, no specific requirement has been identified from our health colleagues.
Okay, and could I just, I think you touched on, Mr. Farmer, you just touched on the accessibility issues regarding means of sustainable transport. Obviously, is the view that basically this site will have satisfactory access and accessibility to local services and facilities, including a regular bus service that would obviously go to local towns in either Widnes or elsewhere in the local city region? Can you just confirm that, please?
That's correct, sir, as I outlined earlier.
Yeah, there's the 2 half-hourly bus services you mentioned. Is that right? Number 62 and number 82A. Is that right? Those are the 2 that you've raised. And would you see further improvements required as part of this particular proposal?
Those services do run nearby the site. Possibly not quite within the 400 metre requirement. So there may need to be some slight diversions, particularly in the termination point, perhaps for the 62 service, to take a slightly different route, which may come through the site, loop round, which would also assist serving of the Alston site too with a local transport service.
Okay. You mentioned the Ditton Railway as well. Basically the plans there. Just briefly, could you just say what the timescales, if there's anything envisaged in terms of the Ditton Railway station, just at this stage? Just.
So, Ditton Station, there's no timescales envisaged at the moment. Obviously, Halton Council are quite keen to promote its opening and are working with Mersey Travel and the combined authority. A feasibility study has been completed last year, and we are still awaiting the outcomes and the programmes for the next step, if you like, for the progress of the station to the next stage.
So that's something that the council are working with the combined authorities in Mersey Travel, is that right? Is basically investigating options into reopening. Okay, thank you. I think I know
perhaps I could, sorry sir, perhaps I could give just a little bit more background to that. Effectively, the part of the proposal, whilst it has been a long-standing proposal, it's sort of interlinked with the proposal for the reopening to passenger traffic as what was known as the Halton Curve. The railway line is on the Liverpool spur of the West Coast Main Line. However, there was also a disused section of track in Runcorn that connected from the West Coast Main Line onto the Warrington-Chester line, and it had been a long-standing proposal to reopen that section of track to passenger traffic, the area, and that's the section known as the Halton Curve. That project has actually been successfully delivered over the last couple of years and has now allowed the reintroduction or the introduction of direct passenger services from Liverpool through Runcorn to Chester. And the intention is that the Ditton station would be, an additional facility that would facilitate, the stopping of local trains, not just the intercity West Coast Main Line traffic.
Okay, thank you for that update. Can I just open up just to the wider participants, any comments in relation to the discussion here on the impact on provision, also local infrastructure, if I could please, in relation to the developments. Is there any comments that anybody wishes to make at this stage? Okay, yeah, Mr. Lander.
Yes, thank you, sir, for that opportunity. Much appreciated. I've just in terms of access to facilities and services and having one eye on the Greenbelt review process, there was an assessment in terms of access to facilities, but it doesn't actually score well, this site. It's 5 out of 12. The key of the sort of major facilities, I mean, I hear what was said about the Ditton rail station, but that sounds like some in the distant future. But sort of major facilities, rail station, secondary school, further education, town centre, local centre, leisure centre, GP services are not accessible to this site. And if I just refer back, if I may, just to paragraph 138, what paragraph 138 of NPPF says is that in Greenbelt reviews, the local authority has to consider the consequences of sustainable development. And the first consideration is previously developed sites. Well, we're not that. And then it's well served by public transport. There is a bus stop, and I acknowledge there are bus services, but the site is not well served by existing facilities, and I would question whether the one element is the post office. I'm not aware of a post office within 800 metres of this site. I'm aware there's a post office in Hale, but that is further than 800 metres. So this is not a sustainable location, and I appreciate that sustainable development refers to economic, social, and environmental. But in this case, in NPPF, we are looking at public transport services, and it's not particularly well served. This will be primarily a car-borne location, and we're talking about a link road already through the site. So that's the point I'd like to make, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Cross, could I just ask you just to come back on the points, obviously in relation, obviously to whether this is a sustainable location, obviously the access to services. Just pick up on those points, and then I'll come to the developers then.
Yes, thank you, sir. I have to say that it's a little depressing that the parish council representatives are again talking down the village in terms of its access to services and its general provision. I would note that I think the access to the local centre, I think again the Greenbelt study was the data was informed by a simple GIS search. Looking at the mapping, I think that the new co-op facility is just with a couple of metres outside of the 600 metre zone. So if I also said it's not within 600 metres, it's a very short distance beyond that, so it is accessible. I mean, the village does have a number of services. It obviously it's got its own primary school. It's got substantial open space. It has a mugger. It has playing fields. The parish council has got a village green. It's got a large area of employment opportunities on the doorstep. I say it does have a comparatively new co-op. It was provided as a replacement. Previously, the village had an ASDA that was relocated into Widnes town centre and the site redeveloped for housing. But I say as replacement shopping facilities were provided in terms of a modern co-op. So the village does have a number of assets and a number of very positive assets and access to services. Whilst, yes, I say it might lack access to a secondary, close access to a secondary school, it's not unique in terms of that, including large parts of the urban area. There's 3 secondary schools within Widnes. There's large areas of the borough that will not be within the specified walking distance of a secondary school. Again, health facilities, similarly, there will be large parts of the existing urban area that are not within the prescribed distance of a health facility. We would say that does not lead to the conclusion that the site is unsustainable, we firmly believe that the site does form a sensible extension to the urban area, and it does have access to a significant number of services, including employment opportunities, and does represent a sustainable extension.
Okay, just to touch on W45, just the small parcel of land just there, in terms of just a view on those in terms of accessibility to services and stuff. Just whilst I've got you on that particular general point, if I could please.
Sorry, again, I say W45, the CBC, that very much is just sort of infill development. The site's not currently within the green belt. Following your comments regarding it being shown as public open space, I was just having a quick reference back to the UDP policies map, and obviously you will note there is a large P notation on the public open space there, so it was not identified as existing open space, it was identified as proposed open space, and that is effectively the open space that was provided as a landscape buffer to the employment development of HBC field that has now been implemented with the greenway running to behind the site. So in terms of the W45 being public open space, I think that was basically possibly sloppy drafting in the part of the UDP policies map.
Yeah, I think what I've done, I've picked it up from the site assessments, the individual site assessments. I think it would have been referred to in those. I think that's probably where I picked it up from. So I guess, is that effectively that what's happened? Is effectively applying to the land to the north of those, so those specific areas are not public open or open space. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So effectively, the proposed open space notation on the proposals map basically extends all the way down to the road frontage, so it washes over the residential properties and the intervening properties between the proposed HPC field development and Hale Bank Road. So I say it's possibly slightly sloppy drafting in the part of the unitary development plan, which has then been picked up by the GIS system when it's populated the site assessments.
So not green open space or green space as such then?
Correct.
That's correct. Okay, thank you. Mr. Eason, if you wanted to come back, obviously just on the discussion there, I think regarding the comments of the parish council, please, on the general infrastructure provision services, I guess, and the comments made regarding sustainable development in the MPPF.
Thank you very much, sir. So I don't have anything to add in terms of the distances, accessibility and range of services that future occupants of the allocation would have access to, because I think I agree with everything that Mr. Cross said in that regard. What I would just add, though, in response to something Mr. Landau said, is you will know already, sir, from the MPPF paragraph 108 requires decision makers who are considering allocations in development plans to consider whether appropriate opportunities to promote, this is paragraph 108A, appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport modes can be or have been taken up given the type of development and its location. So it is not the case that a site has to be accessible to a range of sustainable transport modes as it stands at the moment. It's an undeveloped green field. We have mentioned on several occasions the link road. One of the substantial benefits of the link road, apart from providing more flexibility to routing for car-borne traffic, will be to allow buses to route through the site so that bus travel will be an obvious and sustainable alternative to the private car. Added to which, that in the event that the proposals at Ditton Station come to fruition, it's likely in our understanding that there will be a shuttle bus running to Ditton Station that quite easily could route through the site. So you have combined trips potentially in relation to bus travel and also rail travel. So the overarching point I just want you to go away with, so is that the nature of this site, the careful way in which the work has already been undertaken to master plan the site, all indicates that this can be made into an accessible site. The broader questions about sustainability, so I think that requires a holistic judgment about the extent to which there will be positive contributions to the economic, environmental and social aspects of of sustainable development, all of which we say can quite easily be achieved through the allocation and the master planning exercise that will take place once the allocation has been confirmed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Veason. Mr. Landers, do you want to come back on that point at the moment? Is there any of the participants that want to come back on these points?
Only to the extent, sir. I mean, it wasn't my assessment. The assessment criteria was drawn up by the local planning authority. I'm merely commenting on that. It's 5 out of 12. I think there's no dispute that there isn't a post office within walking distance of the site. So it's 4 out of 12. It's not my assessment. And the issue is really about whether this is going to be a car-borne location. I take the point that Mr. Easton says there will be opportunities to enhance access and to promote sustainable means of access. I take that point, that comes with any development. But it's not a proposal before us. I'm merely commenting on the physical characteristics of the site, that it won't encourage people to walk these distances. They're likely to use their car.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Landers. Mr. Valerie.
Yes, so just a quick point. Obviously, if we look to NPPF 102 objectives for sustainable transport A to E, that tells us that transport issues should be considered from the early stages of plan making process. We would say the council has done that. And secondly, sir, same point Mr. Easton was making, 103 tells us the planning system should actively manage patterns of growth, which is exactly what we're talking about, and make sure that significant development, which I think we would agree this allocation would be, is focused on locations which can be made sustainable or are sustainable. So, sir, without me commenting further on whether it is or isn't sustainable, you've got the point.
Thank you. Ms. Cross, do you broadly agree with that, sort of those issues, just before I just move on?
Yes, broadly, sir, and say also we would draw your attention to say that the plan does contain a number of sustainable transport routes, either through or close to the site. The Transpennine Trail passes through the village, which basically provides a waterfront trail along the West Bank and beyond to Warrington. And if you're very keen, probably I think it takes you all the way to the East Coast, hence the name. We have made recent improvements to the sustainable transport provision. As I mentioned, the new open space to the rear of the HBC field site includes greenway provision through. There's a link through or improved facilities to provide a longer distance cycle route towards the Jaguar Land Rover facility in Hale Woods. So we'll say there are alternative options to the car available, and some quite attractive alternative options to the car available. I say it can be, a little bit disappointing sometimes in terms of the approach from the third party. The council was excluded from putting an improvement to the cycleway through the village green that lies to the north of the village, and so basically that has to resort to the highway at that point.
Okay, and just Mr. Valerie, have you still got your hand up there, or is it all just no? Okay, thank you. Just to wrap up basically on this, then, do the council envisage any physical or other constraints to development, including those associated with nearby land uses and proposed development that would could not be addressed or mitigated?
As has been discussed previously, we feel that yes, there has been identified surface water issue, but you have the evidence in front of you that we believe that can be satisfactorily dealt with through the development management process. And I'm sure we will be having some more discussion about the implications of the HSE consultation zones whenever we move on to the next site, SG13.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to come on to the issue of the plan-wide policy approach versus site-specific. Do you think, obviously, the approach taken at the moment will provide basically by the council, provide a comprehensive and coordinated approach to development, ensuring that infrastructure is required? Is the approach of relying on plan-wide policies effective, or more specific site criteria and development principles required to guide this development. If we just ask the council first, so I'm aware of what Mr. Eason raised earlier, but if we just bring you in first of all, please, Mr. Cross.
Dealing with the plan as submitted, W24, yes, the council is entirely satisfied that the application of the border-wide policies is an appropriate mechanism to see this site brought forward.
Okay, and is that's similar for W45 as well, is that right? Just whilst I'm on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay, Mr. Reeson, please.
Thank you very much, sir. I think events have overtaken us to a certain extent, but I'll just explain our position about development-specific criteria. Our view is it's rather unusual for a local plan that makes allocations, particularly of the size that Harworth are promoting, not to have a series of site-specific development principles or site criteria, whichever description you want to use. And it's for that reason that we set out a series of suggested principles based on the concept of master planning. The site sets out and identifies a range of potential constraints which would need to be addressed through master planning the allocation. I just make it clear, sir, we're not suggesting that in the absence of specific development criteria for each of the allocations, including our allocation, that the plan would otherwise be unsound. However, if that is your view and you think that the plan needs development criteria, that we're more than happy to share with the examination our draft policy. So I'll leave that to you, sir. The second point, though, is even if you don't consider it appropriate to have a set of development criteria for the allocation, what it does demonstrate, and I have mentioned this already, is the very substantial work that has already been undertaken on behalf of Harworth Group to demonstrate that the range of potential constraints which would affect the delivery of this scheme have been considered and responses to them thought about and identified. So when we come on to deliverability, sir, that's a key point I ask you to bear in mind.
Yeah. So just in summary, there, you obviously the plan-wide approach is you feel is probably is effective, but obviously the more site-specific, as you sort of indicated, would benefit. You think the plan in this particular development, is that what you're indicating?
Yes, sir. But look, I mean, there will be a series of development management policies which would apply to any scheme. They would probably do the job. But given that given you have a relatively large allocation, if not I think the largest allocation in the plan, W24, we consider it is sensible and effective planning to identify a series of key issues that apply specifically to that site. But I say again, sir, that if all we are left with is the development management policies, that should still be effective to deliver the allocation.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cross.
Thank you, sir. Possibly just a point of clarification in terms of Mr. Easton's comments. He did state that he thought it was unusual for not to have specific policy in relation to the scale of development proposed by his client. So effectively, it's looking at probably about 1,000 units. That's not what we're currently debating or we're currently discussing. We're currently discussing just W24, which is 484 units, which is certainly on the upper end of some of the allocation sites, but certainly not unusually large. And the approach as set out in the submitted plan is consistent with the approach on other sites.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to come back on the points raised on this particular matter at this stage? Okay. In terms of this specific, as submitted, basically, is there any modifications to the policy of site allocations within relation to this as presented, as submitted to us? Anybody wishes to raise that, I should be aware of.
As I say, sir, we have been in discussion with the developer with regard to their submission in terms of potential amendments to the plan as submitted in order to, which affecting obviously site SG13, to see whether there's a halfway house, if you like, that can be supported by both parties. Obviously, the council's position at the moment is we don't support the Harworth recommended proposed allocations at this time, although we have obviously been working with them in terms of looking if there is a possibility to reject the disposition of the land uses to pick up elements of the proposed scheme that we could put forward as a proposed modification, but that's possibly preempting the discussion on SG13.
Yeah, if I could leave that part of that for the moment, I think what we wanted to do is basically deal with the allocation as submitted, deal with the SG13 as you've asked, and then we'll just talk about obviously the modification that you've indicated just ahead of moving on to SG11. So I'm just going to move on to viability and deliverability, basically in relation to the sites, basically that put forward. So in terms of W24, can the council state whether or not they consider the proposed development is viable in the first instance, and then we can move on to the issues of deliverability in a moment. Mr. Cross, do you?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if this question was directed to myself.
Yes,
yes, obviously, obviously the plan is supported by the plan-wide viability study, which shows that the developments are expected to be viable. We're not aware of any site-specific issues or prohibitive constraints that would impact on the viability or the deliverability of this site.
Okay. And just briefly in relation to W45, that's the same point, is it?
Very much so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just get the developer's view on the question of viability in relation to basically W24, please.
Yes, sir. Broadly agree with what Mr. Cross has said. And as you'll note, sir, we have the link road within our scheme as well, which we've identified the costs for, and which would be covered as part of the development without the need for public funding. So yes, we're confident the scheme is viable as it stands, and that view is partly based on the fact that this is a very healthy housing market area and a location which we believe will be performed very well in terms of house building and house sales.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to the issue of deliverability of the site. We previously discussed, as the council were obviously just producing a schedule, effectively showing out the delivery of the actual site W24, and also presenting a parallel table that shows the potential build out rates and start and build out rates for basically from the developer's perspective, just in case there isn't quite agreement, and really this is just vital for allowing us to discuss matter 17 when we talk about the housing land supply issue. Just to be clear to other participants, obviously this is without prejudice to our consideration really in final decision on the site allocations. It's just there to provide us the best and most up-to-date position and a complete picture of development and preparing a final report. So I'm just going to go through site W24 first, just obviously in terms of the actual landowner developer details and house builder details. So in terms of W24, just clarify those issues. Just if Mr. Cross, basically, I think you've obviously got the Harworth group of the main single owners of the site. I think there's that.
Yes, thank you, sir. Again, I think that there's the same issue that was raised with regards to one of the sites yesterday. The table that's included within my proof, it shows the individual parcels and it affects the build rates on the individual parcels. Obviously, W24 has been brought forward as a single site. So the council's assumptions in terms of the SLA on a site of this size would be that not having planning any planning status at present, we would assume an 8-year lead-in and a 50 dwellings per hectare build-out rate.
Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, can I just ask the developer's perspective, just in terms of obviously just confirm obviously the ownership, obviously it's and if there are any sort of house builder developers that are basically involved at the moment, then maybe you could just give me some idea, maybe the time scales that you think for basically submitting a plan, submitting a planning application, whether that be a full outline, negotiating on the plan, and then timescales for preparation and start on site, and then the build out rates. If you could just give me an overview, thank you.
Yes, sir, certainly. So the entirety of the site is in a single ownership. It's available and deliverable as discussed, and Haworth Group are in control of the entirety of the draft allocation as it stands, sir. In terms of the sequencing, I think it was the next point, was it?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
We would envisage, sir, and I think similarly to other respondents, the working up of an application towards the end of this year, obviously on the basis that the plan is proceeding towards adoption. We would envisage submission of an application Q1 22. I think one of the applications name checked by the council yesterday at Daresbury was the fast-tracked 6-month one that we're involved with, sir. So we were optimistic and would hope to have an approval Q3 22. We very much, sir, like to be on site either at the end of that year or at the start of 23. And so on the basis that we would have at least one phase of the site submitted in detail, and therefore a hybrid application would be lodged with the council, we could see circa 60 units coming off the site in that first year of 2023. And then, so thereafter, we know the council's assumptions on delivery, but we are looking at the site holistically with a mind to this being a very good market area, sir, and there could possibly be between 2 and 3 outlets on this site. So, sir, we've taken an optimistic view that the site could yield from 2024 onwards up to 90 dwellings per annum.
Okay, can I just ask, in terms of obviously our discussion earlier about the natural England requirements for base additional bird service, how would that affect your lead-in time for the site, basically in terms of is it optimistic, basically what you've indicated there? That's what I'm trying to, is it realistic or optimistic in terms of the timescales, given our discussions earlier about the additional need for bird surveys, etc.?
Oh yes, sir, sorry if I wasn't clear, sir. We've instructed the full complement of ecological surveys this year, sir, and yes, we've got the backstop of, I think, the surveys the council has undertaken, but there have been active surveys ongoing over recent months, sir.
Okay. And are there any other comments you want to make at this stage in respect of basically the delivery itself?
In the sense of what, sir?
Is basically 90 dwellings. I suppose my thought is whether 90 dwellings a year is that optimistic, basically,
yes,
for a site, this scale, being delivered in one area at that rate. It just obviously given the obviously the rates that have been projected by the council on this site and on other sites, we just wanted, where there are sort of more than one outlet, I just wanted to be clear, obviously that's realistic and achievable.
Yes, so we'd offered a range between 60 and 90, sir. So if we had to kind of settle on the basis that there's 2 outlets, sir, we'd probably be saying 70.
Okay. Mr. Eason?
Thank you, sir. Just on bird surveys, my understanding from the client is that the bird surveys have already been carried out. Naturally, the results of them will need to be analysed, but you'll appreciate the significance of that, sir. That if we were to make assuming that the plan's adopted towards the back end of this year, the information that will be necessary to inform a planning application is already available. So there wouldn't be any delay as a consequence of that. The other matter in terms of delivery rates. I think I understand that other site promoters have taken a rather more optimistic view about delivery rates. We've taken, I think, a realistic and, dare I say, conservative view about delivery rates.
Just in terms of the wider area, do you think, in terms of, if you looked at delivery rates in the sites, within the area, how they're delivering similar type new build proposals, just so we can get a sort of a feel really for whether this is realistic or, as in this particular instance?
So that might be a question that's above my pay grade. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Vallely.
Okay, Mr. Vallely.
So a particular point I think we're making here is that without labouring it, being on the southern urban edge of the borough, and bearing in mind the particular characteristics of this area in terms of the market, so we do believe this site would be a location perhaps where an element of aspirational housing could be delivered. I know it's not always something that's analysed in great detail, sir, but no, we're confident, and certainly Harworth Group have taken commercial advice on this, that there would be high uptake in this particular market location, so it is particularly attractive.
Okay. Thank you for that. Council, have you got any more comments just in relation to this, or is any of the participants at this stage just on the delivery viability issues? I want to just come to Mr. Cross. Have you got any further comments on this site?
No, sir. The figures are probably in line with what developers have been seeing on other sites, previous sessions, with regard to delivery rates, particularly where there's more than one outlet. Obviously, as I say, the council's figure of 50 per annum is based on an average across a range of sites. So I say it's potentially on the conservative side. So if there's two outlets and the scope for two outlets, 70 per annum seems achievable.
Okay, thank you. We've also got you there, actually, Mr. Cross. Could we just touch on the other site then, please? W45 then, just obviously I think we touched on viability, but delivery of this site, so we can just touch on the same sort of issues. I appreciate, obviously, they're in different parcels though, but yeah, if you give me the best information.
Again, the SLA, which has sort of grouped them together, because the site currently has no planning status, would assume a 7.5-year lead-in time, and being the aggregate being a sort of medium site, we would assume 30 dwellings per hectare. If it would assist in terms of the table, if you would like us to split it down into the 3 discrete parts, we can do so. I don't know if it helps or hinders.
I think they seem to be of similar-ish size, so it's probably easy just to give us a broad picture. It's obviously really we're just trying to ascertain the information. So at the moment, the council-owned sites, I understand, is that right? You're the owners. At this stage, there isn't any timescales for basically delivery. Is that right? They're not likely to come forward in the next 5 years. Is there any sort of ideas when they might come forward? That's really what would probably be useful from our perspective to know.
The latest information that we have from our property services team are that they have been through our asset disposal process, and they have been identified for disposal. I believe that 2 of the sites will probably be brought to market in the next year or so. As indicated previously, one of the sites is currently under lease, and it forms 2 parts: a residential property at the front and a sort of quasi-commercial nursery unit at the back. And I think the intention is that site will be brought to market after the current lease expires. However, I say in terms of the assumptions in the SLA, we effectively were saying a 7.5-year lead-in, so it's sort of immaterial to be counted towards the 5-year supply.
It wouldn't be counted towards the count 5 years. No. Okay, it's beyond that time period you're looking at. So, okay. And there's no other issues you want to raise at this stage in respect to delivery of that particular site or those sites at this stage? No. Just to do the point of view, in terms of, I don't know if you, in terms of your asset management function, how long realistically would it take, do you think, from disposal of this site to, have you got any knowledge locally again, and whether there's, been sales and how long that might take through to planning? It's just as a sort of a broad part figure.
I don't have any analysis to present on that, probably just anecdotal evidence, but obviously they are quite small sites. They're liable to be not attractive to the major house builders. It would be smaller developers who are unlikely to land bank and sit on them. So we'd imagine that if the site was brought forward, if it was sold on to a small developer, it would be brought to the market, it would be developed out very quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I've got nothing further to raise now on the basically this site's W24 or 20 or 45 relations to my parts of the agenda on that. So I'm going to hand over now to Ms. Malloy just to cover the safeguarded land now at SG13, as we agreed earlier. We'd look at that first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Troy. I just wanted to say a few words in terms of how we're going to proceed with this potential alteration. Obviously, as Mr. Troy pointed out at the beginning of the examination, our role as inspectors is to consider the plan as submitted, and as such, we've considered the proposed allocated site at SRL9, and we will move on to discuss the proposed safeguarded site SG13. We're not obliged to consider omission sites, and I will draw your attention to paragraph 26 of the examination guidance notes, which states that written statements should not stray beyond those issues relevant to the original submission. And as such, I suppose I'd like to express our disappointment that these proposals have come very late in the day. Also, a note from the submissions that precise boundaries have not yet been agreed, and maybe that's coming through the statement of common ground. But without those precise boundaries, it's actually quite difficult for us to examine and know what it is we're being asked to consider. That said, we are prepared to have a discussion around the proposed amendment to the allocation, which will hold after the consideration of SG13, and also around the proposed amendment to the safeguarded site. But as you appreciate, we will be giving some considerable leeway in allowing that discussion to take place. So I just wanted to sort of set out our approach and the sort of parameters of our role as inspectors in terms of what we have been asked to consider. And on that note, then I'd like to consider firstly the proposed safeguarded site SG13, land south of Halegate Road. So Mr. Cross, if you could just start off by setting out how the safeguarded site was identified and which options were considered, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, this is probably tied into the general approach of the development of the plan over its various iterations. At the publication draft stage of the plan, this site was actually proposed for housing allocation, and the fields immediate to the south were proposed safeguarded land. With the change to the house numbers as discussed previously, the area of proposed safeguarded land was abandoned, and that's now reconfirmed as remaining as greenbelt, and the area is previously proposed for housing it was referenced W48, but the last year 560 has now been used. They've also the phrase from yesterday downgraded to safeguarded land, and is now reference number 13.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cross. And obviously, in relation to discussions on previous sites, the reduction in the housing requirement was a key factor in the demotion of the site, if you like. But were there any particular site-specific factors, just to flag up? Obviously, we'll get into the discussion in a bit more detail, but any particular pivotal site-specific factors which led the council to sort of pull back from the site?
Effectively, I say there was some discussion at length yesterday about the land at Luntz Heath Road. So this area that's currently site W14 and the remaining area around Cranshaw Hall. Effectively, I say that site was recommended to members for housing allocation. At executive board, members felt unable to support that. As the members were unable to support additional housing requirement or meeting the additional housing requirement in North Widnes, it effectively fell to South Widnes, and there was quite very substantial land areas proposed for development around Hale Bank. I think in total there was 1,700 units proposed at that previous stage. Obviously, as discussed yesterday, with the reduction in the proposed housing figure and the reconsideration of the distribution of uses in North Widnes, and the members voted to support a smaller allocation at the back of Luntz Heath Road, that the 1,700 proposed houses in the Hale area was able to be revisited in terms of meeting the total requirement, and effectively the council considered that W24 was the most logical of the proposed housing allocations and should be retained as such. And if the other housing allocations, they were prepared to say that they weren't necessary at this time. However, they were suitable housing sites, or potentially suitable housing sites, and should be catered to standard land should they be required in a subsequent local plan review. And that is typically that thought process and that decision basically to both SG11 and SG13 being designated added.
Okay, thank you. You're just breaking up ever so slightly there. So I think I caught most of it, but it was just a slight break-up in your voice. In terms of the contribution that the site makes to Greenbelt purposes currently, if you could just briefly summarise in terms of the three main purposes which are being considered in the study, starting with purpose 1 and restricted sprawl. As before you do that, there's obviously the main parcel GB161. And then there's just that, what I call the sort of dog leg, if you like, the southwest corner, which lies within GB parcel 151. So if you could just, in terms of purpose 1, take each of those parcels in turn, please. Mr. Cross, could you unmute yourself, please?
I've been doing so well so far, sorry about that. I was just saying that it might be easy just to refer to Group R in the document, the RD9. It does include a slightly more substantive area. It includes the SG13, but it also includes the land, the fields immediately to the south, which, as we were previously proposed, safeguarded. It typically concludes that the site overall has I'm sure it's moderate contribution to overall properties of the green belt. Again, the site is, in terms of the original purposes, the site is being partially contained. It is not contiguous to the accessible area, although obviously if the allocation of W24 is supported, that assessment would change because the site would become more contiguous with the urban area, so the contribution of that purpose would be reduced.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of in terms of purpose 2, preventing the grounds from merging, again, I say it's not sitting in one of the narrowest gaps. There is a gap towards I'm trying to remember, so sorry, I'm having a mental, the Jaguar and Rover, Hale, Wood, and Liverpool Borough, but to say I think there's still remains a substantial gap, and there's not any danger of the settlements merging in that location. And with regard to safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, again, I think we've already discussed the lack of strong boundaries within this area, and if the land were to come forward for development, which is to say not the current proposal, and the plan I submitted to safeguard is where the site come forward for development in a plan, then it would be incumbent upon development to establish a strong and defensible boundary.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious participants won't want to come in to that discussion. I take your point about considering Group R as a whole, but in terms of the conclusion of the two individual parcels of land, the conclusions were different, weren't they? In terms of GB161, it was concluded would make a moderate contribution to the green belt. In terms of parcel GB151, presumably due to sort of distance from the settlement, would make a significant contribution to the green belt. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Again, it's the issue with the parcellisation approach. Each parcel was looked at individually. I say we did try to address that by grouping parcels so that they could be potential development parcels would be assessed as a whole. But obviously, I say some of the parcellisation or some of the grouping is being maybe overtaken by proposals.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the safeguard site, could you just take us through the proposed boundaries and your consideration on each of those boundaries, whether they are currently a strong greenbelt boundary or weak greenbelt boundary, and then I'll bring others into the discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. As I say, the study did look at a comprehensive approach at looking at all the potential boundaries within the area. Obviously, the Hale Bank Road would represent a strong boundary, but there are some residential properties dotted along the southern end of the road, and the back gardens or the rear of the cottage represents a weak boundary. There is a feature, it looks like a public right of way or a track to the the western edge of the site, which again is assessed as weak. And then there's the dogleg field boundaries, which again are assessed as weak. The nearest strong boundaries to the site are basically represented by Hale Bank Road and Carr Lane, which is they are quite some distance away from the site. With the public right of way, did have the note of the street name that forms the eastern boundary, with W21 was assessed as having a moderate strength. So there's a distinct lack of existing features that represent a strong boundary. So effectively, the site was chosen primarily uses existing field boundaries, but yes, there is a point where it probably does cut across one of the fields in terms of the dogleg site to basically square off the plot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cross. Now I'd like to bring in other participants now in terms of the contribution which the site makes to the Greenbelt in its current form, and also the issue of boundary strength. Yes, Mr. Nando.
Thank you, Mum. I wouldn't disagree actually with Mr. Cross's assessment of the boundaries. I thought he was very fair. The boundary, though, if I can say, to the west is incredibly weak. There is a footpath. It's car lane, but it's barely. When you're on the site, it's barely discernible. The ground is very flat in that location. It doesn't represent any sort of boundary at all. And the southern boundary, in relation to the wider agricultural land, there's no evidence of any historic field boundaries at all. It's all one field. And therefore, the southern boundary, to me, is totally arbitrary. It's got to be created. There's no relevance to permanent features on the site. And I would say that the eastern boundary, well, yeah, it's a very weak boundary. The only strong boundary is a small section of Hale Bank Road. So the back gardens on the north edge of the site are acknowledged as being weak. There's only a very short section of the road which could be regarded as strong boundary. And then the eastern boundary, it is the public right of way, which we've referred to earlier in forms the boundary to the W24. So I acknowledge that exists and it's got a strong hedgerow, but the boundaries around the site generally are very weak, and they are not. They don't relate to permanent features on the ground.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lando. I mean, obviously the western boundary, there is a footpath there which I walked, but it's essentially a field boundary. There's no hedgerow there. We'll come back to the dog legacy later. The southern boundary, there is sort of a kind of intermittent hedgerow there, so that there is a boundary, but as you point out, Mr. Lando, not very strong. And just to come back to Mr. Cross, how would those boundaries be strengthened? But also, can the council just explain its rationale in terms of I can't think of a better term for it, the dog leg to the sort of southwest corner of the site, and what alternatives it looked at to kind of squaring that off.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Again, I say it's probably an area that we struggled with, and it's probably the boundary that was chosen was probably defined whenever we were looking at the more expansive allocations. So we were looking at potentially safeguarded land to the field to the south. Obviously, that's now fallen by the wayside, and the current plan is recommending that those be retained as green belt. There is just a lack of strong physical features. Effectively, yes, you can see that what we've done is we've effectively projected the field line, from the southern end of the site. We've projected that across to the track and effectively squared off the site. I don't think there's any particular thought process or rationale beyond just basically, we're trying to find suitable boundaries or suitable parcelization of the different parcels or different policies at the time. I say the site was originally proposed to be allocated. It's now basically proposed to be safeguarded with the green belt boundary beside going. So the boundary between the two sites, as it was originally not intended. It was not going to be a green belt boundary. It was going to be the boundary between an allocation and between safeguarded land, and it probably has just been rolled forward without being looked at in detail again.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Valerie?
Thank you, ma'am. I won't be long. In terms of your question about the significance the council's allocated to parcel 151 versus its conclusion of 161, we weren't really sure how they got to that point. Ultimately, it's a weak boundary. And ma'am, you'll see from our submissions, we've kind of more or less looked to the development limits posed to the east on Halegate Road as a kind of therefore, where the new urban edge might have itself the existing urban edge on that road. Just go back to the point. We think the point would be this: in the absence of strong boundaries presently being on site, really the question is, can we create a strong and defensible MPPF compliant one? And in the world where that exists, I think obviously the contribution that element of 151 makes would be significantly reduced, and effectively it would be physically joined with 161, obviously in that assessment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cross. I guess the only alternative would be to draw the boundary using that fairly weak boundary on site of the sort of dog leg of the field boundary. Was that considered as an option and discounted?
As I say, ma'am, it was probably the boundary was drawn whenever it was not intended to be a greenbelt boundary. It was intended to be the split between a safeguarded site and an allocation site. And I say it has probably just been rolled forward. I say obviously the existing boundary, the field margin is very weak. It's not distinctive. Any development would have to be designed in order to try and create a stronger boundary. And I say yes, we have just projected the line of the main field boundary across the smaller field until it reaches the public right of way, the track that you mentioned that you walked down.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. So just in summing up, Mr. Cross, in terms of the contribution which the proposed safeguarded site makes to greenbelt purposes overall, and that sort of balance of those assessments, can you just summarise that, please?
I believe the group site overall was assessed as having a moderate contribution towards the purposes of including land within the greenbelt.
Okay, thank you. And just to bring the developer in, do you conclude with that assessment of a moderate contribution to greenbelt purposes?
Yes, and notwithstanding the point that's just made about the northern remit of 151, we think when you look at the land as a whole, moderate is the correct conclusion.
Okay, thank you. Well, on that note of agreement, I think it would be a good time to adjourn the hearing until 2 o'clock, when we'll come back to look at the potential effect of any future development on the greenbelt land and the rest of the agenda on that particular site. Okay, thank you for your contributions. See you again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.